Chapter 21. When he woke up, it was already Sunday. The rustling sound of rain came from outside the window. Dake squinted his eyes as he got out of bed, brushed his teeth, and washed his face. He didn't give Sloth a chance to increase his points. He didn't go to the common room today. Instead, he quietly stayed in his bedroom for a while. The index of a major crime was sometimes difficult to grasp. For example, he didn't do anything right now. He just stood by the window and looked at the rain. His mind was calm and relaxed, and nothing was triggered. However, this state of mind wasn't easy to maintain. At around 7 o'clock, Dake went to the cafeteria for breakfast, which was rare. Then he went to borrow the thinking bottle from Professor Kazayer. Professor Kazayer seemed to think that he was studying the topic of emotion, so he didn't ask much and just borrowed it. The thinking bottle, as the name suggested, was a container used to store memories, emotions, knowledge, thoughts, and other thinking matter. Of course, whether it was memories, emotions, knowledge, or thoughts, they would always fade with the passage of time. First website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP just relying on a thinking bottle that cost a few hundred credits couldn't completely stop the fading of thoughts. It only provided a wall to slow down the loss of the thinking matter. The best time to store the thinking matter was 72 hours. After 72 hours, the fading phenomenon would become more serious. Dake set the next experiment time for the third day on Tuesday afternoon or evening. At that time he should have 3 pride to experiment with. Probably because the rain was getting heavier, the freshmen could only stay in the common room in frustration. Some were reading books, some were playing chess, and some were desperately trying to catch up on homework. Deanna belonged to the last category. She pulled Luosi to a corner of the common room and found a place to sit. She bit her pen and rushed to do her homework. Deanna wasn't very smart. She often had to look at things that others could remember after seeing them once. Her talent was completely focused on magic and physical strength. If it was the previous era when the demons still existed, she would have been a proper paladin who practiced both magic and martial arts. She might have even been able to dominate the battlefield and become a legend. However, in the Shang Malian era, knowledge was the #1 productive force. In order to become a qualified magus, one had to learn to use one's brain. The reason why Deanna hadn't fallen behind in her studies was partly because of Luosi's tutelage, and partly because of Dake's guidance. Dake had helped her a lot in arithmetic, which was the most difficult class for freshmen. Dake had always tried his best to avoid socializing with others, out of fear that he wouldn't be able to control his temper. If he ran into someone from Zuan's side, his temper would be awakened. Now he was afraid that he would lose control of his sense of superiority and become too arrogant. None of the first-grade magisters could fight. The topic of Shang Malian in the Sage Daily began to heat up again, mainly because the descendants of the kingdom's twin swords had become the new Shang Malian. Some of the teachers and students of the Sacred Church's Mystic Arts Academy were jealous. If they could catch one of the freshmen's misconduct and report it, it would definitely be a blow to the Shang Malian's arrogance. Naturally, they set their sights on Dark Diamond, who had a very bad reputation. It was said that this young duke was greedy for pleasure at a young age, arrogant, lazy, stupid, and easily angered. He was simply a target that stood there for people to beat up. Furthermore, targeting Dake Dimming might be able to further attack the Dove faction led by Duchess Arvette. Everything was contradictory and repetitive. The goddess of war, who had once galloped on the battlefield and killed without batting an eye, understood the importance of rest and recuperation. Instead, she became the Dove faction that advocated for peace. The Sacred Church, who had actively advocated for peaceful coexistence and reduced killing during the chaos of war, became the Hawk faction that advocated military expansion in today's world. What was that saying again? Without war, where would faith come from? The Pope of the Sacred Church wouldn't personally take action, but the Chief Archbishop, one of the 36 members of the Sacred Church, would often speak loudly in the Parliament and encourage the king to send troops. Taking advantage of the weak power of the surrounding small countries, they would wipe them out in one fell swoop. The king was old and no longer had the heart, so they encouraged the eldest prince to succeed the throne and conquer the world. The eldest prince had always been ambitious and coincided with the sacred church. As a result, the Dove faction had no choice but to support the mild-mannered eldest princess. Taking advantage of the current Renaissance trend, they supported the eldest princess to succeed the throne. Of course, as a dating game, everyone understood why there was such a setting. Omega? However, a fly wouldn't bite a seamless egg, which meant that the egg was invincible without any cracks. The Hawk faction had infiltrated the Shungmalian pawns, but they couldn't find any dirt on Dake Dimung. Good conduct, excellent grades, good work and rest, self-disciplined, hardworking, not greedy or jealous, gentle, polite, well-mannered, elegant and handsome. It was as if all the good words could be used to describe him. That's right, this was Dake Dimung. An excellent, perfect, and invulnerable man. The future little nun who was secretly observing him almost fell for Dake Dimung's charm. If they wanted to stir up trouble, perhaps the fact that his tamed demon was of the devil race could stir up some public opinion. On the contrary, the other descendant of the kingdom's twin swords didn't seem so good. He was obviously the son of a hero who was more noble than the Valkyrie, but that Mr. God spent all day and night with the son of a small noble in the countryside. Not only did he not do his homework properly, but he was also sometimes late for class. In a week, half of his credits would be deducted. It was simply a disgrace to the hero's family. Moreover, the tamed demon of this hero's son was also of the devil race. The descendant of the kingdom's twin swords, the great hero who annihilated the demons, his tamed demon was actually of the devil race. Although looking at the essence through the phenomenon, the appearance of the devil-tamed demon was due to many factors, but this didn't specifically explain anything. But in the eyes of people who didn't understand magic, this was a big matter that could set off a frenzy of public opinion. However, even the Hawk faction didn't dare to attack the two sons of the kingdom's twin swords at the same time. This would most likely cause a backlash at the national level. As the wisdom of the people gradually increased, the people became more and more difficult to fool. What they originally wanted to do was to secretly provoke the opposition between the two sides, and perhaps use this to pull the son of the hero to their side. But now it was great. The two sides were on completely different levels. How to legislate? Worry. Even so, the Great Sage Daily was still full of open and covert struggles between the writers of the two factions. As the largest and most authoritative newspaper in the country, the Great Sage Daily had an audience all over the country. In this month, everyone in the country knew that the kingdom's twin swords had chosen the Shungmalian side. They also knew that the son of the hero had reappeared. Some people were particularly concerned about whether the son of the hero had inherited the power of the hero. If he had, then did his appearance mean that the prophecies of the prophets were about to come true, and the disaster would return? Chapter 22. The wind and rain of the outside world could not reach the Shungmalian. The little mages did not plot against each other either. The first Sunday of the opening of Traveler Street passed quietly amidst frequent complaints. Then the freshmen welcomed the first class of the 5th week. Professor Shi Erfu entered the classroom on time as usual, but she no longer used the silence card, because the freshmen had learned their lesson. From this week onwards, we will learn how to continuously use summoning spells in a duel. Summoning spells had casting time and intervals. Mana had an output power, a maximum duration of output, and an upper limit of mana. The less magic power there was, the lower the output power. Therefore, how to use limited magic power and cast multiple summoning spells in the same time period as quickly and steadily as possible was a point that the duelists had to consider. The main things involved were the management of magic power and time. Remember the website, MVIP can't you? 6. That was to say, there was a basic requirement for arithmetic. The famous dragon egg mage, Leonardo da Vinci, once said that arithmetic was the foundation of all magic. Whether it was actual combat or research, arithmetic was inseparable. In the past month, Dark had an assessment of his own magic power. His total magic power was still increasing rapidly, and had already exceeded the standard value of a third-year student. The quality of his magic power, even in an unrefined state, was close to that of a second-year student. As for the output power, it was a bit exaggerated. With the normal summoning spells that he had mastered, he did not need to worry about the output blockage caused by the continuous casting of spells. As the top of the first-year students, Dake's normal summoning spell casting time had been reduced to less than 10 seconds. And the same was true for the cooldown of his summoning spells. This meant that he could cast 3 summoning spells in a minute. That was to say, he could use 3 magic cards that could be activated by normal summoning spells. Continuously using normal summoning spells to activate 3 magic cards in a minute. This was one of the final exams of the first-year summoning class. To be able to complete a year-long project in less than a month, it was no wonder that Dake was favored by the professor. Today's summoning class was still with the students of the Night Academy. Dake sat in his usual seat and had a panoramic view of the classroom. Professor Earbook was imparting knowledge that he had already mastered, so he did not have to worry about triggering greed in class. However, he had to pay attention to sloth. But he would usually bring a book to read. And because he was reading books related to the classroom, the professors turned a blind eye when they found out. Some of them even took the initiative to discuss with him. For example, the book that Dake was reading right now was Psychic Magus Red's Summoning Forum. The difference between summoning fairies and other summoning mages. A brand new concept named bond was added to it, which was considered the foundation of mind summoning. When this concept first appeared, it was mocked and ridiculed by many archmages. The magisters believed that the intelligence of the magic-conducting fairies was at most 2, which was half a level lower than the 2.5 intelligence of the familiar. Being able to command them to attack and dodge was already the limit. As for communicating with the magic-conducting fairies and forming a spiritual bond, that was simply a pipe dream. But all of this changed after Red became the champion of the National Magic-Conducting Duel that year. The power of the mind began to be valued, and the magisters began to treat the magic-conducting fairy card as their life. Those who were obsessed would even speak to the magic-conducting fairy card. Enthusiasts would even inject their souls into the magic-conducting card, in an attempt to raise the intelligence of the magic-conducting fairy card, to form a spiritual bond. This would allow the magic-conducting fairy card to explode with the power shown on the interface. Dake had not yet reached this step. The book in his hand mainly talked about how to communicate with the magic-conducting fairy card, and how to obtain a response from the magic-conducting fairy card, in order to reduce the mana consumption and casting time of the magic-conducting fairy card. If he wanted to reduce the casting time of the magic-conducting fairy card to the limit, he needed to master the knowledge in this book. I heard that Professor Kazair will teach us how to create the first magic-conducting fairy card in the next introduction to magic. After we succeed, we'll be able to use this knowledge. Dake couldn't help but imagine what his first magic-conducting fairy card would be. Just then, he suddenly saw Luoboat and White whispering to each other, as if they were plotting something. White and Luoboat were also in the corner of the classroom, but they were on the side near the back door. Luoboat glanced at the window like a thief and whispered, "Didn't I say that it's not easy to be called by the professor if we sit at the back? Look at Dimung, we haven't been called by the professor recently." "Are you talking about Dake?" White also whispered. "No matter what, we can't lose points. Today we must get 40 points. Luoboat slapped the table and said, "Don't worry, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 40 points. It's only 2 classes." White. "That's good, Professor Earbook. God, you answer this question. How to exchange air correctly during the transition between 2 summoning spells." White. "Professor Earbook, I hope you can be more serious in class. 5 points deducted." White. "Luoboat, what should we do?" Luoboat. "It's okay, don't worry. There are 3 classes today. It's okay even if we lose 15 points. White. 15 points, no matter how unlucky we are, we won't lose more than that, right? Luoboat. Relax, it's not easy, White. The summoning class ended under Professor Earbook's cold gaze. Professor Kazair entered the classroom 5 minutes early, but the students didn't calm down. Someone even dared to ask loudly, "Professor, are you really going to teach us how to create magic-conducting fairy cards today?" "Of course." Professor Kaiser slowly pulled out a magic card from his sleeve. His lips moved slightly as he activated the card. A heavy box appeared on the podium. Professor Kaiser clapped his hands and asked, "Is there anyone who can help distribute the materials in this box?" "I'll do it. I'll do it." Amidst a few responses, Emma quietly stood up from her seat and began to distribute the materials. The few students who were shouting the loudest were looking on with a smile on their faces. Professor Kaiser said with a smile, "Métis, 1 bag per person." "Aima." "Okay, Professor." Dake was the last to get the materials. This was a transparent bag containing the materials, and there were even 2 blank magic cards inside. It was obvious that this bag of materials cost more than 20 credits. Chapter 23. Alright. Class begins now. Professor Kaiser waited for the bell to ring before walking to the center of the podium. He looked at the students in the classroom, who were like little lambs waiting to be fed, and couldn't help but reveal a smile as warm as the sun. "I believe that all of you have already heard some things from the upperclassmen. Just as you think, today's magical introduction theory will enter into practice, which is the first creation of the magical elf card." Whether it was the students from the Aristocratic Academy or the Knight Academy, they were all so excited that they howled. It had been a month since they entered the Shungmalian Academy, and only now did they begin to create the first magical elf card in their lives. The students were already impatient and couldn't help but be excited. Of course, if it was Professor Shierfa's class, they wouldn't dare to make such a ruckus. Professor Kaiser gave them 2 minutes to calm down before continuing with a smile. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. It's okay to be excited, but don't relax in class because of this. Today's class has a profound meaning for every little magus. The first magical elf in a magus life will often become a close companion that accompanies everyone for life. As he spoke, he snapped his fingers, and a magical elf card with a glimmer of light appeared between his thumb and index finger. After that, he didn't chant any spells. From that magical elf card, a magical elf with snow-white wings, a small horn on its forehead, and golden eyes, like a kitten, drilled out very naturally. "This is my initial elf, the snow-feathered gold-eyed beast." "Professor." A girl from the Knight Academy suddenly raised her hand and asked. Professor Kaiser nodded, and the girl continued to ask, "Is our topic today the snow-feathered gold-eyed beast?" Professor Kaiser said humorously, "Of course not. It seems that the upperclassmen don't have too many secrets. Our topic today is Magical Phantasmal Beast." Magical Phantasmal Beast? Dake's hand that was flipping through the textbook suddenly stopped. The students also began to whisper to each other. The so-called Magical Phantasmal Beast was a type of phantasmal beast that didn't have a fixed shape. Legend has it that it was illusory, unfathomable, and even invisible to the naked eye. "It can't be?" Deanna asked stupidly. "Didn't the book say that the fantasy beast is an invisible fantasy beast?" Professor Kaiser smiled and said, "The original form of the fantasy beast is indeed invisible to the naked eye, but as long as we move our hands and feet, we can make it visible. And this is the power of a magus. Alright, put the textbook aside. What we're going to teach today isn't written in the textbook." He wrote the words fantasy beast on the blackboard. Then in the middle of the blackboard he drew the outline of a kitten. Before an illusory beast is seen, its form is uncertain. It could be a cat, a dog, or even a dragon. Every phantasmal beast that a person sees may present a completely different form. But magic guiding fairies are different from real phantasmal beasts. The moment they are created, the magus will have some understanding of them. Once an archmage sees it, it will forever be fixed in the archmage's eyes. As for what form it will take, it depends on what you want from the bottom of your heart. In today's class, I will teach you how to make a fantasy beast elf card from the beginning to the end. You have 2 sets of materials in your hands. If everything goes well, you can even make 2 fantasy beasts. If you fail, of course, you will have nothing. As soon as he finished speaking, the whispers in the classroom suddenly disappeared without a trace. Even White and Earbook couldn't help but tense up their nerves. And they selectively chose to forget their biggest problem at the moment. Professor Zaire didn't quote from the classics or talk about rumors in this class. He very carefully explained the steps of making a fantasy beast elf card and wrote them all on the blackboard. About half an hour later, he finished explaining all the main points. The remaining hour of the class was for the students to make the cards by themselves. This was their first time making a fantasy beast elf card, so it certainly wouldn't be smooth. The reason why 2 sets of materials were prepared was to give them a chance to try and make mistakes. Professor Zaire walked down from the podium and observed carefully. In the corner of the last row of the classroom by the window, Dake had also started making the fantasy beast elf card. Professor Zaire's description of the fantasy beast reminded him of Schrödinger's cat. Poor cat. It had been dead for so many years, but it was still repeatedly asked whether it was dead or alive. Because of his rich experience in making fantasy beast elf cards, Dake started much faster than the others. He quickly followed the words on the blackboard and sorted all the materials. He cooked them, sliced them, and finally divided them into small plates and placed them on the table. The core material of the fantasy beast elf card was a transparent long hair sealed in a vacuum bag. The label on the bag said that it was the hair of the fantasy beast, but it had been specially processed before it was sealed, so the transparency of the long hair was reduced a little. It could be seen with the naked eye. There were a total of 2 hairs in the whole bag. It was obvious that the hair of the fantasy beast was a very precious material. The core alchemy array for making fantasy beast elf cards was the number 1 alchemy array. The number 1 alchemy array was also known as the Merlin alchemy array. It was created by the great wizard Merlin. After several generations of optimization, it finally took shape. The high-level wizard Merlin only needed to slap the number 1 alchemy array on the statue, and with the huge magic power, the statue could be resurrected and turned into a life similar to a golem. This was a miraculous alchemy array. It not only pried into the door of truth, but also the core mystery of life. After Merlin, no one else could create such a miracle. Before Dake officially started making the cards, he practiced drawing various alchemy arrays. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he began to make the cards. At this time, many students had already started making the cards. They boiled all kinds of ingredients, sliced them, and added things to the blank magic card. They couldn't wait to stuff everything into the card, and then a magical beast would jump out. Professor Zaire walked past these people without saying much. Some people needed to experience failure in order to understand the value of success. White and Earbook looked like they were cooking curry. Deanna and Luoc had learned long ago. They didn't care about anything and just followed Dake's steps. Although the progress was slower, they didn't mess around. AI Ma's efficiency could be said to be the highest in the classroom. She had already started adding alchemy arrays into the blank fantasy beast elf cards. It was just that during the production process, she would occasionally take a look at the back corner of the classroom. Dake, who was in the corner, finally sped up. P.S. Guess what it is? Chapter 24. After all, it was a beginner card. Apart from having more steps to make the Fantasy Beast Magic Elf card, it was not that difficult to separate each step. The most difficult step was the drawing of the number 1 refining array. However, the number 1 refining array had been taught since the first class of the Introduction to Magic for 4 weeks. Even someone as dumb as Deanna could draw it with ease. What they lacked was only practical experience. That was the problem. For most of the freshmen, today was their first practical experience. It was even their first time using the magic pen to draw the refining array. However, Dake did not have such concerns. Once he got into the zone, his speed of drawing the refining array was fast and stable. The first step is to smear the elven honey on the magic card. The elven honey was made by mixing the powder of the elven tree root with the elven honey and stirring it evenly. The formed elven honey was transparent and light with a hint of sweetness. If taken orally, it could nourish Een. If used externally, it could heal skin wounds. Even if it was not used to make the magic elf card, the elven honey was very popular. In the circle of some aristocratic ladies, Anyone who did not have a bottle of elven honey would be looked down upon. After applying the elven honey evenly, the magic card will have the foundation to cultivate a simulated life form. Then pour in a drop of the freshly concocted brain lobe essence and sprinkle on the secret powder. About 15 minutes later, a half-completed fantasy beast magic elf card was placed quietly on the table. There was only one step left in the entire process. Dake changed the mercury flowing in the blood vessels of the magic pen into a golden magic medicine. Then he began to draw the last refining array. In just 15 seconds, the drawing of the number 1 refining array was completed. The moment the circuits were connected, the entire refining array burst out with a strong golden light. Without hesitation, Dake used a pair of tweezers to pick up a transparent fantasy beast hair and placed it on top of the number 1 refining array. The hair was gradually engulfed by the golden light. The light released by the number 1 refining array became stronger and stronger. When the hair was completely engulfed, the golden light was extremely bright. Golden threads were separated from the number 1 refining formation and wrapped around the magic card layer by layer. Finally, a golden cocoon was formed. At this point, the production of the magical beast elf card was considered complete. But was it successful? Before the golden cocoon broke, no one would know. Yes, just like Schrödinger's cat. Starting from the preparation of the materials, the entire process took half an hour. When Dake stopped to catch his breath, he suddenly realized that almost everyone in the classroom was looking at him. He was stunned for a moment. He noticed that most of the students were looking at the golden cocoon, as if they were looking forward to seeing what would hatch inside. Even Professor Cazell was standing next to him without him noticing. What the hell? Where are your own magic cards? Well, it seemed like all of them had failed. Professor, Dake called out. Professor Cazell smiled gently. Very good. From the beginning to the end, there wasn't a single mistake. You are a born magic-conducting card maker. Pride plus. Dake's expression changed slightly. He quickly said modestly, No, Professor. I'm just more skilled than the other students. Professor Cazell nodded slightly. Dake, there is one last step. Dake, one last step. Professor Cazell. Inject magic and convey your expectations to it. Expectations? Dake frowned slightly. The professor had said before that the form of the magical beast depended on the magician's expectations. But this metaphysical statement was not as clear as 1 + 1 is equal to 2. So what was the expectation? Despite his doubts, he still reached out to grab the golden cocoon and slowly injected magic. What is the so-called magical beast? As a magic elfin, the magical beast will show the appearance of the magician's expectations. Race, attribute, attack and defense, ultimate skill? He was still thinking. Dake suddenly felt a trace of rhythm. He quickly let go of his hand. Then the outer shell of the golden cocoon cracked. With this crack as the beginning, the entire golden cocoon gradually turned into light. When the light faded, only the last magic-conducting card was left on the table. Dake stretched out 2 fingers and carefully picked it up. The originally blurry and transparent outline on the card immediately began to change after meeting his gaze. When the change was over, an unusually familiar little thing came into his sight. Dimming, do you want to try summoning it? Professor Cazell asked. Dake shook his head. No, wait until I find out more about it. Professor Cazell nodded. You can continue to make the second magical beast card. The students realized that Dake had no intention of summoning the magical beast. Unable to satisfy their curiosity, they couldn't help but talk about it. In the first row, AI Mamétis showed an extremely unwilling expression. She was obviously faster than Dake, but because she was in a rush, she made a fatal mistake, causing all her efforts to go to waste. Otherwise, she would be the fastest. Dake, can you show me your magical beast? Deanna asked softly. Luoxi's eyes also lit up. Dake smiled. This time he didn't refuse. Instead, he directly showed the magical beast to them. Card name, magical beast. Type, fairy card. Level. Race, bird beast. Attribute, normal. Magic power, 100 attack, 100 defense, 100. Ultimate skill. Imitation. Yes, this was a magical fairy card named Magical Beast. But it was actually Ibu. Ibu is the one after the little demon. An illusory, unfathomable, and shapeless magical beast. I'm going to vomit. Copying Digimon wasn't enough? Next, he even copied Pokemon? Wait, this Ibu that I made, could it be the original appearance of the magical beast before it was observed? Dake felt that his guess was very likely correct. Just like the little demon in this world, it was just an inferior demon that couldn't evolve. Ibu, who was renamed Magical Beast, could very well have made 2 sets on top of copying. But from the data of the Magical Beast, he found something strange. Ultimate skill, imitation. Imitate the opponent's move and use the same move. The real Magical Beast didn't have this ultimate skill. Does this mean that my Magical Beast is the same as the little demon, and has turned into my shape? Ibu Demon God Appearance. Chapter 25. Generally speaking, Magical Fantasy Beast was the beginner magical elf card of the Little Magisters. It would change according to the Little Magister's wishes. But no matter how it changed, it couldn't change the fact that it was still a 1-star card. Moreover, its magic, attack, and defense stats were all 100, which was very weak. Its commemorative value was far greater than its practical value. When the Magisters from the Shungmalian Academy gradually became stronger, they would usually treat Magical Fantasy Beast as a treasure and would not use it in battle. However, Dake saw a possibility from his Magical Fantasy Beast. It was still the same sentence. The difference in perception determines the difference in magical design. Perhaps this illusory beast, Ivan, really did have the characteristics of a Pokemon and could evolve like a real Pokemon? After thinking about it, Dake observed the classroom. In the classroom, apart from Deanna and Luosi, who were moving forward like a snail, all the other students had failed in their first attempt. The difficulty of making Magical Fantasy Beast was that there were many steps, and a mistake in each step would cause everything to go to waste. Remember the website, Vipcanshu. 6. Therefore, it needed to be very careful and steady. This was also the message that Professor Kazair wanted to convey to them. In the end, when the bell rang, no one else had finished. Luosi also failed. Deanna was still moving forward slowly. Professor Kazair said humorously, "Fortunately, you can continue to make it in the classroom until your second attempt also fails. Oh right, the homework until the next class is to make a Magical Fantasy Beast. You can come to me to buy new materials for 100 credits a pack, just 1 set." After saying this, he packed up his teaching materials and walked away while humming a tune, leaving the students to look at his back. Very angry, Dake didn't leave immediately. He mainly wanted to see what other people's Magical Fantasy Beast would be like. In the end, the second person to finish was indeed Ai Ma Métis. In short, Ai Ma, who was only 1 step behind him, finally succeeded in making it 5 minutes after the bell rang. She couldn't help but smile as she glanced over. Unlike Dake, who could keep his composure, after she was done, she immediately cast Normal Summon and summoned the first magic elf in her life. And it was an otter. She seemed to have a soft spot for otters, and this one had larger incisors than her familiar. As for the third person to complete the production, it was actually the little idiot Deanna. Coconut. Shredded coconut. Coconut shreds. After being excited for a long time, Deanna also summoned her fantasy beast. It wasn't a giant panda, but a polar bear with snow-white fur. It seemed like she didn't care much about it on the surface, but in her heart, she still hoped that she could be as tall and strong as a polar bear like the members of the Great Bear family. Dake looked at White and Luoboat. Luoboat completely destroyed the second set of materials before class ended. White, on the other hand, did a good job. Now they were at the last step of drawing the first refining array. Although he didn't practice much, his hands were unusually steady. If he had a sword in his hand, he wouldn't have trembled at all. Perhaps this was the talent of the hero. Around the 12th minute after class ended, White became the 4th person in the 2 schools to complete the production. Luoboat was even more excited than him, and his cheeks and neck were all red. White, on the other hand, immediately summoned his fantasy beast after he was done. It was a glowing white stag. So the guardian angel was hiding here. Dake suddenly understood. This stag was obviously a bird species with the light attribute, which was the opposite of White's familiar. White was the son of the hero, but his familiar was also a devil species with the dark attribute, just like Dake. White didn't release his familiar very often, perhaps because he was repulsed by the devil species. Dake had seen it by chance, and it seemed to be a minotaurus that was as tall as his knee. It was quite cute. Robert's familiar, on the other hand, was a mechanical-type robot with the steel attribute. The robot had a round head, and its hands were multifunctional arms that could transform into various tools. Its lower body was equipped with caterpillar wheels, and it seemed to be very useful. Dake was quite envious of Luoboat's robot familiar. With an intelligence level of 2.5, it could be an experiment assistant. After White's success, little Luo failed again. She was quite upset, but not too disappointed. Deanna gave her the second set of materials, and the two began to prepare for the third production together. The first class in the afternoon was at 1:30, so there was still a lot of time. 12:10. After lunch, Dake returned to his bedroom. Only then did he summon his illusory beast. Fantasy beast, Ibu demon god. This Ibu's appearance was less animated and more realistic. Its appearance was more like a fox, and its round little face had turned into a fox's oval face. Its mane was more elegant, and its ears were more like a fantasy beast. Squeak. It tilted its head slightly as it called out. This girlish look was simply unbearable. But this was the limit of a fantasy beast with an intelligence level of 2.0. Dake hadn't mastered the spirit summoning spell yet. After trying to command Ibu to perform basic actions such as dodge, charge, lie down and expose your belly, sit down and spread your legs, and jump shot, Dake took out the precious Pride Eye card from his card bag. Is it what I think it is? I'll know once I try it. Fantasy summoning. Pride Eye activated. A dark golden ball of light with a long tail flew out and drilled into Ibu's head. Squeak. Ibu subconsciously raised his hand to cover his head. When he put it down, his eyes had already turned cold. There was nothing to say. This was the image of a cold goddess. Dake tried to give her a touch, but she avoided him with a look of disgust. This kind of behavior from a fantasy beast was extremely inconceivable. A fantasy beast with an intelligence level of 2.0 would normally completely obey the Magister's orders, even if it was wrong, and they were sent to their deaths. It was impossible for them to avoid their master's touch. So that's how it is. Different individuals display different forms of arrogance. Thinking of the little fiendish fantasy beast's arrogance, Dake wrote down a corresponding record in his notebook. Ibu shadow ball. Ibu gave him a sidelong glance with a look of disgust. Ibu tail wagging. Ibu gave him a sidelong glance with a look of disgust. Ibu coquettish. Ibu gave him a sidelong glance with a look of disgust. The nature of the fantasy beast card still hasn't changed. There's only one fixed sure kill skill. Imitation, which consumes 100 magic points. Dake reached out and scratched Ibu's chin. Although the latter tried his best to lean back, he didn't do anything else. But from the looks of it, the life form is indeed slightly different. At least its intelligence level has increased, and it can be considered to have gained sentience. It's the same for the little fiendish fantasy beast. Perhaps this is the basic effect of the Pride series of fantasy beast cards. If Pride I can be upgraded to Pride 2, there should be a further change. 1:10 p.m. Dake went to the potionology classroom in advance, but on the way, he encountered White, Luoboat, and AI Ma. They seemed to be arguing. P.S. At 5 p.m., there's a high probability that the water test will be pushed out, but I don't know which water test it will be. Chapter 26. Luoboat Broheim didn't expect AI Ma Métis to be such a vicious woman. He originally thought that this fellow from the same city as him was reliable. He could borrow money from her. But he didn't expect that she had been scheming since the moment she lent him the credits. Scheming bitch. He cursed. Luoboat. White wanted to pull him back, but she didn't succeed. Luoboat was born in a military family. Although he was stupid, he had brute strength. White inherited the hero's bloodline, but because his parents died, he didn't receive a good education. His body didn't have enough nutrition, so he was a bit thin and weak. The difference in strength between the two might be reversed in the near future, but it was not now. The angry Luoboat's cheeks and neck were red because he was too agitated. His roaring spit almost splashed onto AI Ma's face. 1 second to remember https://m, Vip can't you? AI Ma's face was cold, she didn't get agitated at all. Seeing Luoboat raise his meat bun-sized fist, White quickly grabbed his hand. AI Ma just smiled coldly. Childish people only use their fists. Luoboat's expression was sluggish. His hand lost strength, and he let White grab his arm. But his anger didn't disappear. He still gritted his teeth. Isn't it just 5 credits? I'll borrow it now. AI Ma said coldly. We made a contract, Luoboat. Luoboat roared. It's just 5 credits. AI Ma didn't care. It's too late, Luoboat. It's already the 4th double. The contract started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. Luoboat always thought that it was the day after the turn of the page on the calendar, and subconsciously ignored Friday. But in fact, from the time the contract was signed, there were 24 hours a day. After 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, it was the 2nd day. The 3rd day started at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. It was now 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. The 4th day. The 1st day doubled, the 2nd quadrupled, the 3rd quadrupled, and the 4th quadrupled. 16 times 5. That was a total of 80 credits. Luoboat thought that he only needed to accumulate 40 credits today. Now that they had 35 credits, they would have 55 credits after they won the potionology class in the afternoon. Wouldn't it be easy to pay off their debt? Even if he didn't have enough. As long as he borrowed 5 credits from someone, he would be able to gather enough. Who didn't know how to rob Peter to pay Paul? Those veteran ruffians were the best at this. Luoboat was influenced by what he saw and heard, and his thoughts were extremely similar. Calm down, Luoboat. White finally blurted out. At first, he felt that something was wrong, but now he finally figured it out. Even if it's already 80 credits, we can easily pay it back. 1 class in the afternoon, 2 classes tomorrow morning, plus the classes we already have now. That's a total of 95 credits. It's more than enough. That's true. Luoboat worked hard to calculate, and then finally calmed down. When we pay back all the credits tomorrow, AI Ma, we'll have nothing to do with each other anymore. So it's a drama about paying back debts. I thought it was something else. It seems that the trio still got together, even if it's not a normal relationship. Dake saw that the fight was not going to start, so he turned around and left. It was only 80 credits, and he could pay it back in the blink of an eye. Potionology. Professor Thompson began to teach the students how to brew the mana acceleration potion from this class. This was a special potion that could help a magister quickly recover the magic needed for 3 normal summons. One could take 1 a day. Once the duel entered the competition format, it would be a battle of attrition. It was a test of the magister's magic capacity and recovery ability. The mana acceleration potion often played a role in critical moments. White and Luoboat listened very carefully and did their experiments in order to achieve no points deducted, no points added in this class. But they were really too impatient. Luoboat accidentally added an extra expansion grass when he was brewing the potion. The potion jar exploded, and the lid was blown off. White accidentally knocked over his own potion jar in order to help Luoboat deal with the overflowing potion. Not only were the two deducted 5 points each, they were also punished to stay and clean the classroom. Professor Thompson explained the dangers of the expansion grass in class last week. Luoboat. AI Ma deliberately mocked him when he left the classroom. It didn't matter if it was a real mockery or not. In Luoboat's eyes, it was a very nasty mockery. What should we do? White. We're 10 points short again. Luoboat became depressed after a short moment of anger. White, on the other hand, was looking at the contract with his school card. Then he couldn't help but ask, "What's with this contract? It's guaranteed to double the amount and pay in full? I thought we could pay a little up front and reduce the debt a little. Next time it won't be so much." Damn AI Ma. She's been plotting against us since the beginning. Luoboat leaned the mop against the wall and painfully covered his head. White was much calmer. It seems that we need to borrow some credits from others before 1 o'clock tomorrow. Luoboat trembled. Borrow again? That's not good. As long as we don't lose points in the 2 classes tomorrow morning, we'll have 40 points. Plus today's 45 points, it's enough. White shook his head. Haven't you seen it clearly? 5 points per class. That's our normal level. As expected of the hero's son. After cleaning the classroom, White and Luoboat began to borrow money everywhere. Their primary target was naturally the students of the Knights Institute. Angelina was a good girl. She always had brown ponytails, a few harmless freckles on her face, and a cheerful smile. White and Luoboat could barely talk to her. In fact, that was during the first week of school. The first week of school was when White was the most popular. But there was always a time when the little magisters calmed down. White gradually wallowed in the mire with Luoboat, and was called out by the professors in almost every class. Even if he was the hero's son, it was inevitable that the little magister's impression of him would worsen. By the 3rd week, no girls would take the initiative to talk to them. White was pushed to the front by Luoboat, who said that it would be easier to borrow money with his celebrity. White had no choice but to thicken his skin and say it. Angelina finally understood why the two had called her to the hallway and couldn't help but ask, "Is it because Luoboat doesn't have enough credits to buy the Fantasy Beast material pack?" White wanted to explain, but he was too embarrassed to say it. Luoboat immediately said, "Yes, Angelina. As you can see, we used all our credits to buy magic chess. Can you lend us some? We can sign a contract and pay it back in 3 days." But Angelina just shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I also need to buy the Fantasy Beast material pack." Chapter 27. Just 5 points, 3 points, even 1 point is fine. "I'm really sorry, but I have to keep the rest of the credits. What if the creation of the magical fantasy beast fails again? I don't want to fail my homework." 1 point? What's the use of 1 point? A toothpick can't block a vat, you have to think of another way. Luoboat? If you don't have enough credits, you can borrow them from White. The credits from the hero's child aren't enough? Then there's no other way. It's like this, I already agreed to lend credits to Barbara. Her expenses in Traveler's Street are too high, so she can't gather 100 credits. Luoboat? Forget it if White borrows from me. I actually need to buy the magical fantasy beast material package, hee hee your head. While White and Luoboat were having trouble borrowing money, Dake found new fun in the bedroom. Research on the magical fairy. Sure enough, as long as one put their mind to it, they could find countless possibilities. Even with the strict demon god bloodline, they had no choice but to submit to the human imagination. First website. https://m. Vip can't you? VIP Dake studied while sucking on Evie. He wasn't lazy and Evie only sucked lightly. It was a small satisfaction in life. The so-called 7 great sins were nothing more than this. The research on magical fantasy beast, Evie went very smoothly. As the effects of Pride Eye disappeared, Evie returned to its soft and cute personality, no longer appearing arrogant, but the spirituality in its eyes remained. Although its intelligence couldn't compare to the little magical beasts, it was close to 2.5 of a normal familiar. But compared to a familiar, a magical fairy couldn't maintain its form for a long time. They were consuming magic power at every moment. The initial consumption was the magic drawn from the Archmage's summoning spell. This portion of magic power was consumed relatively slowly, and even if it wasn't much, it could still last for 3 to 5 minutes, and then it would consume its own magic power. The magic power consumption of a 1-star magical fairy was 1 point per second. According to Evie's total magic power of 100, it could only last for an additional minute and 40 seconds. If he released the sure kill skill, imitation, with a mana consumption of 100, it would directly dissipate. The next time he wanted to summon it again, he would need to replenish its mana first. If he repeatedly replenished his mana within a short period of time, the durability of the magic elf card would rapidly decrease. This was the same principle as a battery's storage capacity being depleted after multiple uses. However, the Magic Elf card had a corresponding repair method. It could be repaired by using some of the materials used to make the Magic Elf card. Therefore, Magisters would often keep a set of materials for their main Magic Elven card as a backup. Small darts. The little devil beast flapped its wings and shot out a shark head syringe. Ivan nimbly dodged, and then used his sure kill skill, imitation. A syringe of a slightly different color was quickly formed, and shot back at the little fiend. The little fiend shrieked as it flew high into the air to dodge, while Ivan quickly dissipated after releasing imitation. Dake looked at the little Ibu that was slowly forming on the illusory beast. Ibu card and began to replenish its mana. According to the description in the textbook, replenishing mana wasn't difficult, as long as he paid attention to the speed and amount of mana injected. When the Magic Elf card gradually glowed, it meant that the mana had been replenished and was overflowing. Dake gathered mana at his fingertips and drew a small hexagram magic array on the card. He then pointed at the center of the array, where Ibu's little belly was, and injected mana. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The Ibu on the card suddenly moved shyly, giving Dake a fright. Then he immediately realized that he might be able to enter the realm of Mind Magisters through another way. 2 minutes later, Dake learned how to move the magic array while replenishing mana. The magic array moved with the movement of his fingers, and he continued to inject mana without stopping. Dake used his fingers to rub little Ibu's belly, listening to the squeak, 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 squeak panting, and the corners of his mouth gradually turned perverted. Extreme Bliss +1 Tuesday. This week's dual class finally entered a new phase. At 7 o'clock in the morning, a notice suddenly appeared on every student's school card in the 4 first years. Dake pulled out the constantly vibrating school card from his card pack, and found that it was a notice to change classrooms. I see. Today's dual class will be held in a dual hall? There were 3 dueling halls in St. Marianne, 2 indoors and 1 outdoors. The indoor dual hall was usually used for teaching, and there were 2 of them. The outdoor dual hall was used for duels, and was one of the few places that outsiders could enter, apart from Travelers Street. Every week, from Friday afternoon to the end of the weekend, countless spectators would come from all over the kingdom to watch the duels, and a large number of fan clubs were formed for this reason. Of course, the spinach industry's infiltration was unavoidable. It was often said that the Shung Malian was the biggest spinach leader. Today's dual class for the first years was held in Dual Hall 2. Dake walked into the hall a little later, and there were already many students curiously watching. During extracurricular time, whether it was the indoor or outdoor dual halls, they were usually occupied by the upperclassmen, and this was the first time that the freshmen could relax and observe the facilities in the hall. The first impression of the dual hall was that it was tall. It was so tall that it reached the ceiling like the clouds. The second impression was the biggest. It was said that the dual halls were built using the venue card as a template, and could be changed according to the needs of the students. As 8 o'clock approached, more and more students poured into the hall. The aristocrats, the knights, the sorcerers, and the fools. The freshmen of the 4 schools arrived one after another. This was the first time that they were all in the same class. The freshmen of the aristocrats were mostly in the same class as the freshmen of the knights. The freshmen of the sorcerers were mostly in the same class as the freshmen of the fools. Therefore, the people on both sides were not very familiar with each other. When Professor Pawa Jones arrived, the 4 faculties were divided into 2 distinct sides in the stadium, and the 2 faculties on each side were also far apart. Since everyone is in high spirits, let's run 2 laps around the hall. Professor Cheong-si was dressed like a physical education teacher, and only wore a small shirt with a bow below the ball, tightly binding the ball, and revealing his rock-hard abs. It was clearly the first time that the junior magisters had experienced the so-called running laps, and the hall was filled with complaints. The first to start running was Luo Boat, who had a sharp gaze. Luo Boat only glanced at White, and then suddenly rushed out of the crowd. Although it was very sudden, it was also very conspicuous. Very good, Broheim gets 5 points. Luo Boat couldn't help but be ecstatic, and his steps became even more powerful. Although the hall was large, Luo Boat had undergone formal military training before entering the school, so he had enough stamina to run 2 laps without feeling tired. White, on the other hand, was dog-tired. On the other side, Dake finished his run at a leisurely pace, and when he looked up, he saw White, Ai Ma and Luo Si, who had just started their second lap, as well as a large group of sorcerer students. Chapter 28. Speaking of which, Dake had received an elite aristocratic preschool education, which actually included horse riding and archery. As the son of the Valkyrie, he had also received training to wield a sword, but he had given up halfway. Most of the aristocratic academy's freshmen were the same. Even if they slacked off during training and didn't do their best, they could still maintain their fitness level. However, many of the Magic Academy students could read books all day without exercising. Their fitness level was much lower than the aristocratic academies. Not to mention the Knights Academy, the Fools Academy was basically at the same level. As a result, it was obvious who would fall behind and who wouldn't be able to finish. For example, Ai Ma, a standard calligraphy addict who had been assigned to the Knights Academy for some unknown reason, her fitness level was no match for Luo Si's. After running half a lap, she was already gasping for breath, and her face was pale after 1 lap. Luo Si was no different from her. White, on the other hand, was in a better state. A month of eating in the cafeteria had allowed his body to absorb a lot of nutrients, and his health was gradually recovering. Remember the URL, MVIP can't you? VIP. Even though he still felt like his bones were scattered after the run, White was still able to pull through. After recovering with Luo Boat's help, the two turned to look at Ai Ma. White's eyes were filled with uncertainty. Luo Boat was simply gloating. If not for the fact that he was worried about having his points deducted, he might have already ridiculed and added insult to injury. 5 points deducted from Métis. 5 points deducted from Flotty. 5 points deducted from Swati. Professor Cheong-si mercilessly deducted points from the freshmen who couldn't finish the run. It seems that none of you followed the morning run I suggested last week. I've seen a lot of you students from the Magic Academy. You think you can gain an advantage in a magic duel just because you have a little bit of brains. But you don't know that a magic duel also has a physical requirement for the magisters themselves. Since ancient times, there have been countless duelists who fainted on the stage due to lack of stamina. Or do you want to make the headlines because of this? Professor Cheong-si showed his stern side for the first time, while Ai Ma, Luo Si, and the others became tragic background boards. You have 5 minutes to rest. Seeing that Professor Jones's gaze had softened, the little cutie Diana immediately slipped to Rose's side and carried her to the bench at the side of the stadium. She ignored Rose's struggles and carried her to the bench at the side of the stadium to rest. The rest of the students had more or less friends. In the end, only a lonely little Ai Ma was left, sweating profusely and sitting on the ground with a pale face. White couldn't bear it and said, "Luo Boat, do you want to help her?" Luo Boat only mocked. Help her? On what basis? White, we're not friends with her. White, that's true. This was a turning point. 5 minutes later, the students gathered again. They stood in 4 squares in the form of 4 schools. Professor Cheong-si finally talked about today's topic. We're almost done with the basic theory of duels. Today's lesson is mainly about the actual practice of magic duels. First-year students aren't eligible to join the duel club and participate in the duel held by the school. But we have our own duel mode. It's the elite mode created by the mental Magus Red. Who can tell us what elite mode is? Luo Boat from the night school immediately quivered and whispered, White, here's the chance to add points. White's face was ashen, but I don't know. Ai Ma raised her hand shakily. Dake had already broken away from this low-level interest. Professor Cheong-si glanced at Ai Ma's face and chose a girl from the mage school. Swati, you're here. Yes, Professor. The girl named Sarah Swati had healthy wheat-colored skin, a high nose bridge and slightly plump lips. She was also anxious to get back the points that were deducted just now, so she said, the so-called elite mode is a duel mode that uses magic elven cards as the core. Duelists are only allowed to use magic elven cards and some auxiliary magic elven cards. Most of the other magic elven cards are prohibited. Duelists can only summon one magic elven card in each duel. According to the rules, it can be 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3, and 6 versus 6. Okay, Swati will add 5 points. Sarah wanted to continue her long speech, but Professor Cheong-si interrupted her. The elite mode mainly tests the quality of magic elven cards. Even if there's only one magic elven card, you can still duel. This is more suitable for first-year students. Now those who have successfully created magic elven cards, please step forward. Thus people walked out of the queue one after another. There were Dake Deanna, and 3 others from the Aristocrat Academy. There were Ai Ma, White, and 2 others from the Knight Academy. There were Sarah and 6 others from the Sorcerer Academy. There was only 1 person from the Fool's Academy. A total of 17 people stepped forward. Other than Deanna and White, they were all top students in the first year. Only 17? Professor Cheong-si's face showed obvious astonishment. You are the worst batch I've ever taught. The students were speechless. Professor Cheong-si said, Today's main purpose is to learn from each other and demonstrate. I'll be holding a small competition in class on Friday. The champion will be awarded 1,000 credits. 1,000 credits? How many strange candies can you buy with that? Someone was drooling. The little mages, who had just spent some money in Traveler's Street, were still far from having enough fun. White and Luo Boat were also excited. If we have 1,000 credits, won't we be able to pay off any debt easily? Even Ai Ma was interested. That ancient bookstore opened by the goblins seems to be stocking a batch of very expensive ancient magic books. Of course, there were also people who wanted to take a shortcut. Horn Magic Shop sells semi-finished magic cards to the public. Even beginners can easily make up for it. The price is 998 credits. Dake's face was indifferent, thinking that he really didn't have enough credits. Professor Cheong-si couldn't help but smile when he saw that the 1,000 credits reward had a strong effect on the students. The next part of the class was to choose students from the 16 who had successfully created the Fantasy Beast cards to demonstrate. White participated actively for credits and was successfully chosen by Professor Cheong-si to receive 5 credits. The 2 of them each had 5 credits, and with the basic course credits, they had 30 credits. They had already received 45 credits yesterday, so they had 75 credits. 75 credits. White. Luo Boat said excitedly. Next, as long as we get 5 credits in the arithmetic class, we can pay off our debt. Let that Miss Otter die. White was also very excited. It's only 5 credits, we can still get it, right? After class, the students of the 4 schools received a notice at the same time. Today's arithmetic class was held in the large classroom. Professor Li Li's little darling Dake Dimung was the substitute teacher. Chapter 29. Dake was dumbfounded when he received the notice. He read it over and over again, and finally confirmed that his name was on the notice. What the hell is Professor Li doing? There was a 30-minute break between the dual class and the arithmetic class. Dake hurriedly rushed to Professor Li Li's office to verify. The office door was not locked, and it was very quiet inside. Dake knocked a few times and pushed open the door. Suddenly, the strong smell of alcohol rushed out from the crack, as if it had finally found a vent. It was so pungent that it could kill. Ugh! Dake covered his nose, summoned his courage, and risked his life to open the office door. On the desk that was usually used for books, homework, pencils, and other things, there was now a smelly little fairy lying on it. 1 second to remember. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP Professor Li Li's dragonfly wings were folded together, and there was a small mountain of alcohol bottles around the desk. It was unbelievable. The dignified dean of the Sheng Malian School of Magic almost died from alcohol in the office. Was all of this a loss of morals or a loss of humanity? Welcome to Hedgehog Cat's Midnight Show. The villain just wants to live a peaceful life. Dake. Professor Li Li struggled to open her eyes. When she saw Dake, she could not help but raise her arm. Please, please. Before she finished speaking, Professor Li had already closed her eyes again and snored like a dead pig. Dake. So what the hell is going on? He quickly closed the door to prevent the embarrassing appearance of the dean of the School of Magic from being exposed. The office did not look very messy. There were no signs of a fight, so it was not a murder in a secret room. Well, that was what happened. Dake confirmed that Professor Lily had only fallen asleep. He carried her down from the desk and placed her on the sofa. Fortunately, Professor Lily was just a little fairy with a delicate body. Otherwise, he would not have been able to move her. Clack. Something slipped from Professor Lily's other hand. Dake bent down and picked it up. It was a beautiful card decorated with blue flowers. A blue enchantress? Pure love and honest kindness. A blue enchantress that kept its promise. He reached out and touched the card. The flowers moved to the side, revealing the person behind the flowers. It was a human youth with a round face and a sweet smile. He looked like an angel. Who is this? Dake frowned but felt that he should not pry into other people's privacy. He put the love divination card back in Professor Lee's hand. Then he took off his coat and covered the professor. He turned around and prepared the class. He was just a substitute class. The first-year arithmetic class was ridiculously simple. Even though Dark didn't have the time to prepare for his lessons, there was no need for him to do so. The biggest problem was that he had to face students from 4 schools at the same time. Because Professor Cheongsi and Professor Lily had switched classes, the 2 classes in the morning were held together by the 4 schools. The aristocrat school and the night school were fine. The students from the School of Magic and the School of Fools. He really did not know all of them. Fortunately, he only needed to attend 1 class. I'll try my best to get through it. Today, I'll tell them what an exponential explosion is. The bell rang. Dake rushed into the classroom before he was late. Because it was a large classroom, the students from the 4 schools consciously sat in 4 rows. When Dake walked into the classroom, it was strangely quiet. Probably because no one thought that one day, a student of the same grade would stand on the podium and teach them. Dake felt the gazes of all the students of the same grade, but he did not feel uncomfortable. As the son of the kingdom's only duchess and the son of one of the kingdom's twin swords, the Valkyrie, he was the center of attention wherever he went. Excessive praise, excessive flattery, and excessive doting had eventually nurtured a tragic character. Fortunately, it was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep had left the sheep. Dake walked up to the podium. Then he immediately experienced Professor Ka-Zayer's exclusive perspective equals. So Professor Ka-Zayer is usually so difficult? There were 3 professors in the school who were less than 1.5 meters tall. However, Professor Lily and Professor Didi were winged fairies who always flew in the air without touching the ground. Only Professor Ka-Zayer was especially difficult. Dake was 12 years old this year, and was more than 1.5 meters tall. He did not look short when standing with the students of the same grade. However, when he stood on the podium, he was indeed lacking something. He looked down and saw that there was a footstool hidden under the table. Professor Dimming, who had suddenly grown taller, introduced himself first. Hello everyone, I'm Dake Dimming. I believe that there are very few people who do not know me. In short, today's class will be temporarily taught by me. If you have anything you want to know, you can ask first. The class was 90 minutes long. Dake was prepared to spend a few minutes answering questions, and then spend another 10 or so minutes talking about the homework from the previous class. Then he would switch to teaching and talk about some things that the first grade had not taught yet. Probably because he looked good when he smiled, the atmosphere in the classroom eased a lot. AI Ma Métis of the Night Institute raised her hand, and Dake nodded at her. AI Ma immediately asked, "May I ask where Professor Lily went? What caused her to not be able to come to class?" This question was obviously what the students wanted to know as well. There was a slight commotion in the classroom because of this. Dake could not help but smile. Professor Lily stayed up all night yesterday to study the Laplace demon. She only fell asleep not long ago because she was too tired. Aima was puzzled. What is a Laplace demon? Dake. A type of mythical beast. Emma sat down, half believing and half doubting. Another freshman from the Magician Institute immediately raised his hand. Dake said, "Student from the Magician Institute. Do you have any other questions? The freshman's words were sharp. May I ask why student from Deming can stand on the podium? If it was me a month ago, you would be dead by now, Dake said. Because I corrected your homework. The freshman's expression froze as he sat down awkwardly. Following this, many students raised their hands to ask questions. Most of the students from the Magician Institute were unconvinced, while the students from the Night Institute were simply unhappy. The students from the Fool Institute did not care, while the students from the Aristocrat Institute were naturally proud. Dake only needed to glance around to see what was going on below the podium. The students from the Aristocrat Institute were taking this opportunity to mock the Night Institute. Dake was wondering if he should give them a warning, when he suddenly saw Luoboat raise his hand. Luoboat Broheim. Luoboat stood up and asked the question he was most concerned about. May I ask if the credits for this class still count? Chapter 30. This was Luoboat's main concern. If this class didn't count, then his debt with White would be over. So why does it have to be this class? Luoboat roared in his mind, his emotions stirring. However, this was Dake's first time teaching a substitute class. How could he know if the credits counted? He thought for a bit and decided to give it a try. Very good. Broheim's question is very constructive. It seems like everyone is very concerned about this. How about we do an experiment? Luoboat. What experiment? Dake suddenly shouted. Broheim, deduct 5 points. Luoboat's expression changed. He hurriedly checked his school card. He really did lose 5 points. Website. https://mvip can't you? VIP Dake asked. How is it? Did you lose any points? Luoboat nodded with an ugly expression. Yes. Dake smiled. Broheim had 5 points. Even though he didn't know the reason behind this, he clearly had the authority of a professor in this class. He could control the students' credits. As a substitute teacher, he could be considered to have earned his title. Sure enough, when they realized that this student of the same grade could actually deduct points from them, those students who were dissatisfied with him all restrained themselves. Dake said, since everyone has no more questions, let's officially start the class. Please take out the exercise book and turn to page XX. Oh right, no one should have missed their homework, right? The students of the Magical Device Department were slightly disdainful of his doubts. Some students of the Night Department even opened the exercise book for him to see. Speaking of which, the last arithmetic class was last Thursday. It had been a full 5 days since then. Any normal student would have missed their homework, right? No way, right? Originally, according to Professor Lily's practice, she would collect the exercise book before the end of the class. Then, she would mark it and distribute it in the next class. She would also assign the new week's homework. However, Dake wanted to waste more time, so he planned to finish the homework today. Anyway, most of the time, he was the one marking the first-year homework. After today's lecture, it would save him the trouble of correcting it. But just as he was about to open the exercise book, he suddenly raised his head and noticed that there was something wrong with Luoboat's expression. Luoboat didn't feel right. He almost wanted to cry, because he really forgot to do his homework. Of course, the White beside him didn't write a single number either. However, White was better at controlling his emotions than Luoboat, so he didn't show it. The homework for the arithmetic class was usually assigned on Thursdays. Because it was close to the weekend, many students would do the homework on the weekend. But last weekend was Traveler Street's first open day. White and Luoboat spent a huge sum of money to buy the latest magic chess. Starting from Friday afternoon, they spent the entire weekend playing with the magic chess. How could they still remember their homework when they were distracted by their playfulness? On Monday, which was last night, they had been thinking of ways to borrow credits, so it was even more impossible for them to do homework. Hey! Luoboat suddenly felt a pain in his thigh. He subconsciously turned his head to look at White. White retracted his hand and hurriedly gave him a look. Pretend. But how could he continue pretending? Dake originally didn't want to do anything. He really couldn't be bothered. But Luoboat's behavior was so obvious that even the Aristocrat Academy students across the aisle noticed it. One of the students even looked at him maliciously and slowly raised his hand. If he didn't do anything now, then it wouldn't be justifiable. Dake helplessly said. Powell, what do you want to say? Powell slowly stood up and pointed at Luoboat proudly. Dear Dimung, I saw a mouse hiding an exercise book in his pants. Dake turned his gaze to Luoboat and glanced at White next to him. He simply said, God, check Brohim's homework. White helplessly lowered his head and reached for Luoboat's exercise book. He had to take it, because he didn't do anything. He had to sacrifice the rook to save the king. After pretending to check it, White helplessly said, Sorry, it seems like he really forgot to do his homework. Dake's face darkened. Very well, Broheim. Do you still remember how many points you'll lose if you don't do your homework? Luoboat clenched his teeth. Dake expressionlessly said, 10 points, Broheim. White tightly grabbed the edge of the exercise book. He suddenly had a very bad premonition in his heart. Dake didn't delve too deeply into it. Instead, he copied the exercise books onto the blackboard and explained them one by one. Occasionally, he would ask questions and even use stories to explain some difficult questions. He was much better than Professor Li Li's script-based explanation. The students gradually realized that those extremely difficult exercises seemed to have suddenly become easy. Luoboat's face was ashen. White tried his best to pretend that he was listening. He had never hated himself so much for not doing his homework. They were both first-year students. They were both sons of the kingdom's twin swords. But now, one was lecturing on stage, while the other was afraid of being found out that he didn't do his homework. He gripped his pen harder than ever. The explanation of the exercises went much smoother than Dake expected, especially when it came to dragging time equals underscore equals. 10 minutes to ask questions and half an hour to do exercises. In the blink of an eye, 40 minutes had passed. Dake looked at the clock and knew that it was time for him to talk about some useful knowledge. Thus, he followed his initial train of thought and talked about the story of the exponential explosion. Of course, he couldn't really talk about exponential. After all, it was too out of his scope. The idea came from yesterday when he accidentally bumped into the debt dispute between AI Ma, White, and Luoboat. Even though Dake didn't hear the specific content clearly, it didn't prevent him from recalling a story about a millionaire going bankrupt. Today, since he was standing on this podium, he had to leave something behind. Thus, he followed his train of thought and said, The famous dragon egg magus, Da Vinci, once said that arithmetic is the foundation of all magic. Some of you think that arithmetic doesn't have much of an impact on magic duels, so you don't study it diligently. You don't even do the little homework. This kind of behavior is very stupid. If you don't even know basic arithmetic, don't talk about magic duels. Even in normal life, you can be played. Once upon a time, there was a millionaire named Jamie. He went bankrupt because he didn't know arithmetic. Then Dake told the story tirelessly. One day, the millionaire Jamie came across a strange incident. A man named Webb said to him, I want to make a contract with you. I will give you 100,000 holy coins every day for an entire month. You only have to give me 1 point on the first day. In the future, you will give me twice the amount of money every day. Jamie only saw the difference between 1 point and 100,000 holy coins and said in surprise, Really? You'll keep your word? The contract began to take effect, and Jamie was ecstatic. On the first day, Jamie spent 1 point and earned 100,000 holy coins. On the second day, Jamie spent 2 points and earned 100,000 holy coins. On the 10th day, Jamie earned a total of 1 million holy coins and only paid 12 holy coins. On the 20th day, Jamie earned a total of 2 million holy coins, and Webb only earned a little over 5,000 holy coins. Jamie couldn't help but think, how good would it be if the contract could be signed for 2 or 3 months? But from the 21st day onwards, the situation changed. On the 21st day, Jamie spent more than 10,000 holy coins and earned 100,000 holy coins. On the 28th day, Jamie spent more than 34 million holy coins and earned 100,000 holy coins. In the end, while Jamie earned 1 million holy coins in a month, 31 days, he paid Webb more than 21 million holy coins. Jamie went bankrupt. AI Ma. Luo Boat's roar reverberated through the classroom. P.S. Looking for recommendation tickets. Looking for clicks. Looking for collection. Chapter 31. Luo Boat regretted his words as soon as they left his mouth. But there were some things that couldn't be taken back once they were out. He rested his hands on the table and stood up, bearing the gaze of almost every student in his year. Suddenly, his mind cleared and he understood the situation he was in. Broheim, do you have a problem with AI Ma Métis? Dake's voice was still flat and emotionless. Luo Boat, however, heard something different. He broke out in a cold sweat and his legs trembled. The story of Jamie, the millionaire, overlapped too much with his own. He had been emotionally unstable when he was exposed for not doing his homework. This time, it was as if he had been cheated out of 21 million credits by AI Ma. He couldn't control himself and went berserk. It's over, I've completely screwed up. Luo Boat was so disheartened that he didn't even notice White tugging at the corner of his clothes. He remembered the URL. VIP can't you? 6-inch Broheim, I'll ask you one more time. Do you have a problem with AI Ma Métis? Dake stood on the podium and asked for the second time. Luo Boat braced himself and replied, No, Dake. Then Broheim deduct 10 points. The arithmetic class was over. Dake packed up his textbooks and went to Professor Li's office. He wanted to help her tidy up her office, or at least throw away all the wine bottles. The Year 1 students waited for him to leave before a commotion broke out. The students of the Aristocrat Institute were the most excited because Dake's class was simply too good. They all said that they would rather have Dake teach in the future than Professor Li. Even the students of the Magic Institute had to admit that Dake had done a great job in this class. The students of the Fools Institute also praised him in a very honest manner. Only the students of the Knights Institute bore the strange gazes of the other 3 academies, their hearts filled with complex feelings. In this class, they were like negative examples clown circus members. As for the clown Luo Boat, he almost crawled under the table. A total of 20 points were deducted from this class. Not only did he lose all of his basic points for this lesson, but he also lost all of White's basic points. Originally, the 2 brothers were working together to get 75 points. Seeing that they were only 5 points away from clearing their debt, it just so happened that these 5 points became an insurmountable moat. Whose fault was this? Of course, it wasn't Dake's fault. Dake was already generous enough. No matter where this matter was put, there was nothing to say. In that case, it could only be his fault. Not doing homework, growling in class. His scalp was torn apart. Sorry, it's all my fault. Luo Boat said painfully in a corner. White leaned against the wall and thought about something. She said lightly, It's fine, Luo Boat. Let's go borrow 5 points. Before, it was Luo Boat who comforted him, but now it was the other way around. White wasn't that angry. The key was that Luo Boat came to his senses at the end, and didn't tell anyone about this. Otherwise, he didn't know if AI Ma was in trouble, but they were definitely in trouble. Being set up as an example and hung on the Shungmalian pillar of shame for 6 whole years wasn't something a small magus could bear. In this matter, they weren't just victims. Once exposed, perhaps the protagonist in Dake's story would change from the so-called millionaire Jamie to the brave child White and his friends. He thought about how popular he had been since school started. Now in just a month he had become a loathsome debtor. White felt a sense of loss. If I had been studying seriously since school started, would I be the one standing on the podium now? And not dimming? Things didn't develop as White thought. They hadn't been able to borrow money last night, so how could there be an accident this afternoon? He didn't know if the first-year students realized the importance of arithmetic after listening to Dake's story, but they definitely realized the importance of credits. Therefore, they held on to their credits even more tightly. White and Luo Boat couldn't really put down their pride or directly state their reasons for asking for help. Frequently borrowing money made them even more annoying. At 12:45, White did some calculations. In another 15 minutes, the debt would double from 80 to 160, and they only had 75 credits, so they still needed 85 credits. There were only 3 classes left before the next deadline. The guaranteed minimum for these 3 classes was 60 credits. If they wanted to save enough credits in these 3 classes, they would need to get an extra 25 credits as a reward. White said in silence, "Luoboat, let's study seriously." Luoboat covered his mouth. "But White, did you do the magic history homework?" White. Professor Lily's office. "Come on, drink this bowl of hangover soup and forget the past." No. Be gentle, it's going to leak out. Gurgle so bitter woo. Dake placed the bowl of hangover soup on the table, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Professor Lily wasn't just a first-year professor. If he hadn't woken her up at noon, he would have been forced to substitute for the upperclassmen. At that time, he couldn't possibly talk about calculus or quantum mathematics, right? Maybe it would be a good idea to teach her some geometry knowledge? He was afraid that he would teach her a sense of superiority, and that would be the end of it. In short, thanks to the little evil magical beast, I got the special sobering soup from the halfling chefs. Even though it was a little bitter, the effects were remarkable. Professor Lily sat up with a dispirited expression. His jacket slipped off, revealing his gentle shoulders and collarbones. Dake grabbed his jacket back and didn't give Professor Lily a chance to play tricks. "Professor, I still have class, so I won't disturb you. Also, I've already explained all the homework from last week. //886. Bang. Nothing went wrong in the magic history class in the afternoon. As usual, Professor Didi read out the materials for the class, and occasionally picked 1 or 2 people to answer questions. Generally speaking, as long as they didn't fall asleep in this class, it was basically impossible to lose points. White and Luoboat came to the classroom early to finish their homework. Although they did a mess, they would have to wait until the next class to lose points. As soon as class was over, the 2 hurried to the library. They had never been so enthusiastic since the beginning of the semester. The 2 classes on Wednesday morning were potions and summoning. It was really difficult to earn an extra 25 points in these 2 classes. They had to perform better than Dake and AI Ma. AI Ma entered the library 1 step behind, and saw the 2 hurriedly disappearing figures. "Has it started?" she whispered in a low voice and turned around to enter the reading room from the other side. She walked to her usual seat. After sitting down, she took out the thick, historical figures and legends book from her bag, and opened it to the page with a bookmark. On the left was a portrait, and on the right was the legend of this person. After reading this account again, Aima couldn't help but say to herself, "I didn't expect that Diming's lecture today would have the same effect as this story." PS1. I'm dying without a recommendation ticket. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Asterisk asterisk go go go. Chapter 32. Aima borrowed this book from the library the night before the opening of Travelers Street. Reading historical biographies and listening to history was one of her few hobbies. This book, Historical Figures and Legends, was more of an entertainment type as it recorded a lot of interesting stories. And this page recorded the story of the inventor of magic chess, Armide. Legend has it that a long time ago, Armide invented the first version of magic chess with a 64 grid board. He was loved by the king, so the king decided to reward Armide. When the king asked him what he wanted, he said to the king, "Your Majesty, I only want some wheat. Please have someone put the wheat on the board I invented. Put 1 grain on the first grid, 2 grains on the second grid, 4 grains on the third grid, 8 grains on the fourth grid, and 16 grains on the fifth grid. Put twice as many grains on each grid as the previous one until all 64 grids are filled." Let's not talk about how big the board was to be able to fit so many grains. In short, the story was exactly the same as the ending of The Millionaire Goes Broke, told by Dake. The king finally realized that even if he used everything he had, he still wouldn't be able to fill the 64 grid board. Aima was inspired by this story, but she didn't expect that White and Luoboat would be so bad. They clearly knew that they were in a debt crisis, yet they still couldn't get the class foundation points. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP, especially their performance in arithmetic class. It was simply beyond her imagination. In the beginning, Emma couldn't stand being pestered anymore. She wanted to teach them a lesson because she was angry that the hero's children had fallen so low. It would be even better if they understood the importance of academic credits and learned from her. She didn't expect things to develop to this point. As for the so-called loan, in fact, the school rules clearly stated that loans of more than 10 times the principal were invalid and not recognized. In other words, after 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the contract was completely invalid. White and Luo both only needed to return a bit of the principal, which was 5 credits. As for the fact that the two didn't even read the school rules, Ma felt that it had nothing to do with her. In any case, she had never thought of taking back the credits the moment she had given them away. However, she wasn't so kind as to remind the two of them. Looking at the two annoying people running around in vain for a non-existent huge debt, Ma couldn't help but feel a trace of amusement. It could only be said that this was the nature of humans. She was not pure, kind and beautiful. But now, it seemed that things were going in a good direction. They had never been to the library so early before. On the other side, Dake Dimming was already in the laboratory. After he borrowed the key from Professor Kazair, he immediately went into the laboratory. After accumulating pride for 3 days, Dake couldn't wait to test it out. The third drop of pride was drawn in the lab, so it didn't cause him much trouble. He was also quite familiar with the creation of Pride Eye. Dake first drew out today's pride and dripped it into the thinking bottle to mix it with the pride from 2 days ago. Then he sealed the bottle cap and shook it slightly to mix the pride of the 3 periods evenly. Soon, a faint dark gold color appeared in the bottle. 2 minutes later, he bought some basic materials from the laboratory cabinet and began to boil an auxiliary potion called brain juice. This potion could be smeared on the magic card in advance, which could slightly change the surface properties of the magic card, making it easier for emotions and other thoughts to attach to it. This was also one of the gains Dake had made from flipping through the books for the past few days. After the brain juice was successfully boiled, it was a kind of liquid that appeared like egg white, with a slight sour taste. Next was to boil the paste that acted as a sealing liquid. After the sealing liquid was finished, it was finally time to officially make the magic card. Blank magic card remaining. 2. One of them was bought, and the other was left over from the magic card class. Dake chose one of them, spread it out on the lab table, and evenly smeared the brain juice. Then, he took a deep breath to calm his emotions, and his fingers stopped trembling. 1/3 of an inch below the mouth of the thinking bottle, there was a layer of water membrane that prevented the loss of memories and other thoughts. He carefully inserted the demon brain dropper into the membrane, taking note that he had to be especially careful the first time he inserted it, and not break it. When the tip of the demon brain dropper was inserted into the appropriate position, he gently squeezed the demon brain before letting go. After repeating this a few times, the demon brain dropper screamed. Dake stopped pressing and pulled out the demon brain dropper. He pressed the tip of the demon brain dropper against the blank magic card and squeezed the demon brain hard. The bit of pride stored in the demon brain was spat out. The effect of the brain juice came into play, and pride was like ink entering water, gradually spreading out. As the blank magic card was dyed a rich dark gold, Dake pulled out another drop of pride and dripped it on the card. The dark gold color became even darker. Finally, it was the 3rd drop of pride. As this drop of pride spread out, the black color gradually gained the upper hand, and the so-called dark gold turned into dark gold. Dake recorded this phenomenon and began to apply the sealing liquid. He skipped over the next steps. When the final refining array came into play, a brand new dark gold pride magic card was completely formed. Dake resisted the urge to experiment there. First, he cleaned up the traces in the lab, and then returned the key to Professor Kazair. Finally, he rushed back to the bedroom and took out the branch card, Illusory Beast, Ibu, Pride Eye, and the new Pride. If he added the Happy card, that would be all the magic cards he had now. Generally speaking, experiments needed to be compared. But Dake picked up Pride Eye and looked at it for a while before putting it down again, ready to experiment with the new Pride. Then, he made a choice between the branch card and illusory beast, Abu, and picked up the branch card first. Branch card was a high-level magic card distributed by the Academy. It was well made and was not easy to break. As a familiar, the little devil beast was more resistant to a type of plant than the magic fairy. Dake took a deep breath. In the name of Dake Dimung, summon the familiar. Dake used his index and middle fingers to hold the branch card and activated summoning. With the loss of magic power, a hexagram array appeared. The little devil beast pitifully crawled out of the array. It knew that tonight was going to be another difficult night. P.S. The net cleansing is coming again scared. If there are any sensitive topics and keywords in this post, they will be deleted. Old bro, please forgive me. There is another update in the morning. / ***, looking for recommendation votes. Greed +1. Chapter 33. Magic Summoning. Dake used his index finger and middle finger to hold Pride's magic card, and lightly swiped it in front of him to activate summoning. In an instant, a black and gold light beam suddenly shot out. The thickness of the light beam was completely out of Dake's expectation. The little demon beast that was squatting on the desk was also shocked. However, the black light seemed to have a cruise guidance system, as it accurately hit the little devil beast's head. Ah! The little demonic beast instantly let out a painful shriek. Its entire body seemed to have been hit by a heavy hammer. It flew backwards and hit the wall with a bang sound. It slid down as if it had died, leaving behind a trace on the wall. The bedroom instantly quieted down. The corner of Dark's mouth twitched, but he only stared at the motionless little demon beast. Website: https://mvipcanchu. VIP. Half a minute later, the little fiend quietly opened its eyes and patted its body with its wings, as if nothing had happened. It stood up with an arrogant look on its face. What a filthy environment. Blocked air, forgotten ashes, unclean souls. It's as if staying here for a moment longer will cause you to be infected with a barren disease. Do you know what you did wrong? You don't have the self-awareness of a poop picker. You don't know how to offer your great master the most exquisite silverware and the most delicious blood. Dake couldn't help but complain. What kind of vampire are you? The little fiend shook its head slightly. Vampire? No, please don't equate such a lowly species with me. I'm the great bright star, the son of the morning. I'll eventually rise to the sky and hold my throne high above the stars of the gods. I'll sit on the mountain of the gathering, at the extreme north. I'll rise above the clouds and be equal to the Supreme One. However, you'll fall to the underworld and reach the deepest part of the pit. So the Chinibi disease is getting worse? Dake wrote in his notebook. I've confirmed that too strong of a pride has a probability of damaging the brain. Then he automatically blocked the little fiend's noise and carefully observed its changes. The most obvious change was the skull pattern on its forehead. After being hit by Pride's black light, it turned into a strange red mark. It seemed to be a special coat of arms. In the middle of the coat of arms was a swastika with a symbol above it. The outer circle of the coat of arms was an English circle. Level 666 system. Lucifer code. Pride below the seal. The inner circle of the coat of arms read, Caution. Purgatory level 1. Dake thought about it, and copied the coat of arms and translated it. Outer circle, level 666 system. Lucifer code, Pride inner circle, warning. Level 1. Although Dark didn't know much about 666 and the other two symbols, he roughly understood that this was most likely a coat of arms that represented Pride. In other words, this new Pride magic card has allowed the little fiend magical beast to obtain the recognition of Pride. But what of it? It can't be just a watermark, right? Dark grabbed the little demonic beast that had its head facing the sky and let it shoot another small dart at the wall that it had previously shot at. How can my pride be humiliated by thee? Trash. Release me from my restraints. Small dart. No. Although it resisted verbally, the little fiend's body still obeyed its master's order. 3 syringes with shark heads quickly condensed under its wings and shot at the wall. Puff. 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 The 3 syringes pierced the wall at the same time. Next to the original 3 points, 3 deeper and bigger points were shot out. The power has increased. Dake was pleasantly surprised. This new pride card not only withstood the injection of 3 points of pride, but it also received a considerable upgrade. Okay, I'll temporarily name it Pride 2. Demonic spirits were different from magic elves. They couldn't display their data in the form of cards. But there was no doubt that the little fiend's strength had increased. Perhaps it was no longer a 1-star trash. Maybe I should experiment with Ivan first. About 13 minutes later, the pride emblem on the little fiend's forehead gradually faded and turned back into the white skull from before. The moment it regained its consciousness, the little fiend immediately flapped its wings and flew up. It muttered to itself in a daze. Why is it 6 o'clock already? Go to the cafeteria to get something to eat. I can't let my dear master starve. Dake was speechless. Dake quietly waited for Pride 2's cooldown to end as he ate the takeout brought by the little fiend and read books on emotions. In the end, he waited for 3 whole hours. Such a long cooldown made Dake gradually realize that this Pride 2 might not be perfect. The problem should be the quality of the blank magic card and the materials used to make it. Maybe there's a problem with the combination of the array? Although this Pride 2 seems to be usable, the long cooldown makes it unable to be used twice in the same match, or even on the same day. I can think of a way to refine it and make a few more backups, but there's a limit to the number of cards in a regular match. But I can more or less see that 3 points of pride should be the limit of this 10-credit blank magic card. After recording the results of the experiment, Dake picked up Pride 2 again. This time, the subject of the experiment was naturally little Ivan. Ivan, who was summoned from Illusory Beast, Ivan, opened its cute eyes and tilted its head slightly. The evil demon bloodline possessor Dake Dimming stretched out his evil hands towards the cute little Ivan without any pity. Summoning magic. Swipe card evolve nothing. After being hit by Pride 2's light beam, a red pride emblem also appeared on Ivan's forehead. Not only did this emblem not seem out of place, it actually made it look even more devilish. The cute Ivan instantly became arrogant. It no longer gave face to its master, Dake, and only left its but behind as it looked out of the window at the night scenery. It was very peaceful. Dake wasn't surprised. He directly picked up Illusory Beast, Ivan, and checked its stats. Card name, Illusory Beast, type, Elven card, level 4 all, race, bird/beast, attribute, normal magic power, 500, attack, 700, defense, 300, killing skills, imitation round eyes. Although it didn't evolve, the numbers have indeed increased. There aren't many other changes, but there's one more skill. Killing skill. Round eyes. Round eyes. Ivan uses its arrogant eyes to stare at the opponent, making the opponent feel defeated and reducing the opponent's attack power. In other words, it changed from a blue card to a purple card? Wait, does this mean that the little devil monster has an additional skill under Pride 2? Divine skill, myriad recommendations. Chapter 34. Dake wasn't stupid enough to stay up all night waiting for Pride 2's cooldown to be over. When he woke up in the morning, the hazy light shone through the curtains, creating mottled spots. Dark used Pride 2 on the blinking little demonic beast. Angle, /. The little demonic beast that flew into the air looked down at its master, laughing arrogantly as it stuck to the ceiling. Dake didn't care about such a small matter. Little magical beast, use another skill on the wall. Familiars couldn't go against the Magister's orders. In this regard, the magical fairy, which didn't have valves, had more autonomy. Of course, under normal circumstances, a magical fairy with an intelligence level of 2.0 wouldn't have the thought of going against its master's orders. Therefore, even though the little magical beast was unwilling, it still used another skill on the wall. It opened its eyes wide, and 2 spiraling light waves shot out from its dark golden pupils. If the wall wasn't completely fine, Dake would have thought that it had learned some sort of magical beam cannon eyes skill. Remember the URL. VIP can't you? 6 But he quickly realized that this was most likely a skill that was used on living creatures. Therefore, Dake immediately summoned magical beast, Ibu. Although magical fairies weren't living creatures in the traditional sense, they could still be considered as living creatures. As expected, the spiraling light waves shot out from the little magical beast's eyes were finally effective. Ibu's eyes gradually became blurry, and it fell asleep in the end. Ultimate skill, Demon's Hypnosis. Demon's Hypnosis. Shoot a hypnotic wave from the eyes to hypnotize the enemy. After completing this small experiment, Dake began to set his next goal. There's still a limit of 5 points for Pride this month. Why do I feel like it's not enough? The 3-day shelf life of the thinking bottle is too short. Maybe I should get some credits to buy a higher grade one. Also, I want to try making other magic cards from the Big Sin series. Let me see, the ones closest to 100 points are Wrath and Bliss. Wait, why would I have such thoughts? Dake Dimung Danger. Dake quickly abandoned this dangerous thought. His main goal now was to reduce the value of Pride, before he could continue with other experiments. After a month of training, his self-control was getting stronger and stronger. Other than Bliss, being difficult to control, and Fury, being a little worrying, Greed was a little dangerous. As long as Pride, which was the hardest to control, was removed, there wouldn't be any problems in the short term. When his self-control was stronger, he could try to control a certain major crime to around 100. Hiss. Dake Dimung, your idea is very dangerous. The Shungmalian sky was shrouded in dark clouds. The first-year students welcomed the second class of the week, Potionology. As usual, Dake arrived at the classroom early to wait. However, to his surprise, there were 2 more people in the classroom that he normally wouldn't see. White and Luoboat actually came to the classroom early, which was a rare occurrence. What's wrong with them? Did they get stuck in their heads? Although Dake noticed that something was wrong with the 2 of them 2 days ago, he didn't think too much about it. However, this morning's situation was particularly obvious. White wasn't as flashy as some people, but he was a person who paid attention to his image. Dark had never seen him looking like a chicken coop like today. And what happened to his eyes? Was he bullied? Could it be that other than me, Dake Dimung, there was someone who dared to bully the son of Braveheart? OMG. What was that thing tied to Luoboat's forehead? Invincible. Are you going to debut as the center? Dake was speechless. As the time for class drew closer, more and more people came to the classroom. Someone couldn't help but ask. White was chewing on his pen, his face gradually becoming ferocious. Luoboat's primordial spirit had already left his body, his soul separated from his body. He replied in a daze. It's nothing, this is the price of learning. So learning required such a high price? You guys didn't stay up all night studying, did you? Sleep at 10, wake up at 6, and nap for half an hour to maintain energy for the day and increase efficiency. Staying up all night was not advisable. Dake really wanted to pass on his experience to them. However, it seemed impossible. Ding ding ding, the bell rang at 8 o'clock sharp. Professor Thompson entered the classroom right on time. Today is theory class. With just one sentence, the students' spirits were dampened. Although the experimental class was more difficult, compared to the dry and boring theory class, the first-year students obviously preferred the experimental class of brewing potions by themselves. However, White and Luoboat's eyes were glowing red. Aren't we lucky? Luoboat. Yes, White. It seems that our efforts have been blessed by the goddess of luck. For today's potions class, I'll definitely score 5 points more than you. Ha ha ha, you've got guts, haven't you? White. The 5th minute of class. Professor Thompson finally raised his first question. How do you purify the elven honey during the process of making it? I remember talking about this last week. Does anyone remember? White suddenly raised his hand. However, before Professor Thompson could notice, he quickly lowered it again. This one up and one down was truly frightening. It was like an elevator going out of control and plummeting to the ground floor. Victor wiped the sweat off his brow, and his whole body sobered up. Luoboat anxiously asked, "What's going on, White?" White looked embarrassed. Ha ha ha, how could I possibly know what we talked about last week? How about you, Luoboat? Luoboat looked stupefied. If you don't know, how could I know? The 36th minute of class. White fiercely pinched Luoboat's thigh. Luoboat jumped up like a grasshopper, but covered his mouth in time. Professor Thompson, who was writing on the blackboard with his back turned, did not notice them. Just now, Luoboat had fallen asleep for the third time. Falling asleep in Professor Thompson's class was no joke. Professor Didi, who taught the history of magic, would deduct 10 points at most, all the basic points of the class. Professor Thompson, on the other hand, would give you negative marks. Luoboat was sweating profusely. His eyes were swollen, and his eyelids were as heavy as iron. The 63rd minute of class. Professor Thompson finally came to the point they had prepared for last night: how to use magic to assist in the preparation of potions. White was very confident in his own magic. Professor Thompson poured a mixture of different colors into a 5L beaker, and then took out a mercury glass rod filled with mercury. He was about to call a student to demonstrate how to use magic to make the rainbow liquid into 7 distinct colors. White, whose eyes were swollen like a toad's, immediately raised his hand. White Gouda, you do it. Chapter 35. It was not easy for White to walk from the back of the classroom to the front desk. It was not his first time on the podium, but it was the first time he was so confident. After walking this path, he went through a mental journey. Professor Thompson gestured for him to take the mercury glass rod. Mercury was one of the most cost-effective magic conductive materials. It had a magic transfer rate of more than 93%. Therefore, both the magic pen and the glass rod used mercury as the core. Victor felt the coldness from the glass rod, and his eyes inadvertently swept across the classroom. Aima was sitting in the front row of the classroom. However, Aima did not seem to care about him at all. Aima was staring at the rainbow liquid. No one knew what he was thinking. The students from the Academy of Knights were obviously surprised. It was the first time Aima had raised his hand on the podium. The students from the Academy of Nobles were more like a circus, waiting for a good show to start. He did not know that the students from the 2 academies were just surprised and amused by his messy hair and dark circles. 1 second to remember. https://m. Vip, can't you? Vip in the last row of the classroom. Dake was sitting by the window, reading with his head down. Why would he not be called if he did not look at the podium? White did not have time to think about this. His mind was in a mess. Working 24 hours a day, and using his brain too much made him feel like he was going to explode. It was only because his mental power was strong enough that he was able to hold on. He did not doze off like Luoboat. Speaking of Luoboat, why did he lie down again? White woke up in an instant. Sweat appeared on his hot forehead. No, I have to attract Professor Thompson's attention. Therefore, he subconsciously inserted the mercury rod into the beaker. The rainbow liquid filled half of the beaker. The 7 colors that were mixed together were like all the pigments that were poured together in one breath. It was physically disgusting, not to mention separating the 7 colors. However, White happened to read about it when he was preparing for class. He believed he could do it. Professor Thompson looked at his haggard face and asked worriedly, "God, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Professor." White took a deep breath and tried to inject magic power into the mercury glass rod. The rainbow liquid was a special kind of liquid. Each color had a different affinity for different concentrations of mana. Therefore, he only needed to divide the mana into 7 levels according to the different concentrations in the mercury glass rod. Then, he would slowly adjust and stir at a uniform speed, allowing the different colors of the rainbow liquid to absorb the mana of different concentrations. Then, the 7 colors of the rainbow liquid could be divided into 7 levels of a single color. Of course, theory was theory, and practice was practice. Although White was very confident in his magic talent, he was not in a good state right now. In order to prevent any mistakes, he slowed down as much as possible. When the White started to stir, Dake looked up. He was actually quite surprised by the hero's son's sudden burst of energy, but he did not know how far he could go. The White on the podium had successfully divided the concentration of mana into 7 levels, but the next part was more important. It was very difficult to maintain the continuous output of mana and steady control of the concentration of mana, while stirring the mercury glass rod at a uniform speed. Among the first-year students, Dake was the only one who could do it easily. The other two were Ai Ma, who was serious, and Saraswati from the School of Magic. Professor Thompson wanted to ask Dake to come up and demonstrate, but White raised his hand first. But since it was the hero's son who raised his hand, Professor Thompson trusted him, even though he did not perform well in the first month of school. Fortunately, White did it slower than he expected, but he did use the right method. This made him change his view of the hero's son slightly. A few minutes later, the rainbow liquid in the beaker was finally divided into 7 levels from top to bottom. The sunlight slanted, making it look like a dream. I did it. White breathed a sigh of relief. I did it, Professor. But when he turned to look at Professor Thompson in surprise, the mana in the mercury glass rod suddenly went out of control, and the 7 separated colors mixed together again. This scared him silly. Clap, clap, clap. Applause sounded in his ears. It was Professor Thompson's encouragement. Good job, God. 5 points. Shocked and surprised, Victor almost grinned as he went down. Now the gap between me and Dimming should be narrowed a little, right? But when he was about to sit down, he heard Professor Thompson's stern reprimand. I mentioned in the first class that no one is allowed to sleep in my class. Broheim, deduct 10 points. The class bell rang. White quietly woke up Luoboat, who had slept for half of the class. What's up, White? Is the class starting? Yes, it's time. Second class. Right, Luoboat. What's up? I got 15 points more than you. Second class summoning. Luoboat, who had just woken up, didn't make any more mistakes. But the duo soon realized that it was useless to cram at the last minute. Even though they didn't fall asleep in this class, they still didn't get a single point. They were lucky that they didn't lose any points. After class, the two sat in the classroom and summarized their results. 75 plus 20 plus 20 minus 5 minus 10 plus 20 is equal to 120. 40 more points. White sighed deeply. He really felt that it was difficult. They had tried their best. Why couldn't they do it? Luoboat was also very depressed. After so many failures, he was no longer as relaxed and lucky as before. In desperation, Luoboat said helplessly, White, how about we ask Ai Ma for help? White turned to look at him. His bloodshot eyes widened. No way? Did you forget how you scolded her 2 days ago? Just a few words. Luoboat said guiltily. She'll forgive us. White couldn't help but cover his head. He broke down. What the hell are you thinking? Let's be clear, we're already irreconcilable with her. Luoboat. But, White's eyes focused again and gradually brightened. No buts. It's right and proper to pay back what you owe. I won't run away. Besides, there's still a chance. Let's go play a game of magic chess. Luoboat was shocked. Magic chess? White, yes. Why not? I'll sleep after the next game. I haven't slept for 30 hours. Luoboat. Let's go eat first. There's no class today anyway. White. Okay. The two went to the cafeteria and ordered a few dishes. Luoboat ate a lot, but White didn't have much of an appetite. He noticed that the people around him were looking at him strangely. He subconsciously tidied up his messy hair. At this moment, the students of the 4 schools received a notice at the same time. Astronomy class had started. Secret technique. 10,000 swords in one. Chapter 36. Astronomy was basically an interest class, and the class time was completely up to Professor Didi. Even though the class schedule was from 1930 to 2100 hours, it was actually adjusted. For example, today's astronomy class would start at 1800 hours in the evening. Since there was no class on Wednesday afternoon, most of the students weren't in a hurry. They only whispered to each other, and guess what Professor Didi would teach in astronomy. But as expected, there were too few topics in astronomy and life. It was even more illusory than magic. The students could only rely on their imagination, and they were inspired by legends and stories. White and Luoboat didn't have so much spare time. The two of them suddenly became nervous. It wasn't that they wanted to prepare for the class. They didn't even have a textbook for astronomy. Moreover, after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, their debt would double, and that would be a total of 320 credits. They only had 120 credits, and the remaining 200 credits couldn't be earned from the next 3 classes. Website: https://mvipcan'tchoo. VIP. Therefore, they had completely given up on earning credits from the class. Luoboat just wanted to lie down and wait for death. White, on the other hand, placed her hopes on the dueling class on Friday. The prize for the champion of the dueling class was a total of 1,000 credits. If they could get this prize before 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon, they would be able to clear their debt. Victor's original plan was to use his fantasy beast for duel practice from tonight onwards to increase his chances of winning. But now, not only was her time taken up, she also had less time to catch up on sleep. Wait, speaking of fantasy beasts. White couldn't help but look at Luoboat and whisper, "Luoboat, the introduction to magic is tomorrow morning. Where's your fantasy beast?" Luoboat's expression gradually changed from nervousness to fear. Dake Dimming was in the library. Among the first years, there were 4 people who spent most of their free time in the library. One was Dake, one was Ai Ma, one was Sarah, and the last one was an unknown student from the House of Fools. Exactly one for each school. They were basically the top students of their respective academies, and were at the pinnacle of intelligence. Dake wanted to look for some astronomy books to read after he received the notification that his astronomy class was about to start. Because astronomy was a hobby class, there was no final exam, so he was more casual when looking for books. A copy of Astronomical Symbols. A copy of Starry Sky Decryption. This piqued his interest. He took out the 2 books and moved them back to the desk in the reading room. It paid attention to Astronomical Symbols, because it saw a circle of symbols on the cover of the book. One of them was that appeared on the coat of arms of Pride. So that's how it is. This is the symbol of the sun. Dark drew an O on the paper and then added a. He seemed to be deep in thought. The symbol of pride is the sun. It doesn't seem so unacceptable. The sun is the central celestial body of the solar system. The 8 planets, asteroids, meteors, comets, outer Neptune celestial bodies, and interstellar dust in the solar system all revolve around the sun. And pride's sequence level is 1, which is the number that fits the central symbol. If I remember correctly, one of Ivan's evolved forms is to have the power of the sun. This is a reference point. How to connect the sun with pride. Maybe it will help me analyze the sin of pride. It was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Dake ate some dessert in the dessert room and drank a cup of unscented black tea before he packed up and left the library. Today he still drew pride for storage. His goal was to accumulate as many credits as possible before Friday afternoon. Then he would replace it with a longer shelf life and return the thinking bottle to Professor Ka-Zayer. When he passed by Ai Ma, Dake happened to catch a glimpse of her studying the value of money. This made Dake a little shocked. He felt like this girl was going astray. Dake couldn't help but shake his head when he thought of the argument she had with White and Luoboat about the credit debt. The astronomy classroom was in the spiral clock tower in the center of the Shungmalian castle. Climbing up the spiral staircase to the 12th floor, one could reach Professor Didi's astronomy classroom. If one didn't come early, it was easy to be late. Dake was glad that he had a good habit of coming to class early. This class was still held by the 4 schools. The students from the School of Magic were obviously more interested in astronomy. Before Dake arrived, there were already many people in the classroom whispering excitedly. Professor Didi was a very kind little fairy. As the dean of the House of Fools, she didn't get angry at all even when she deducted credits from the students. And as soon as class ended, she would be very easy to talk to. Even if the students were chattering in the classroom, she wouldn't mind. Yes, Professor Didi was already sitting on the podium. 6 o'clock sharp. The bell didn't ring. Instead, it was the loud bell that symbolized the alternation of day and night. Duang. The bell rang throughout the campus. The sun set and the moon rose. On the spiral staircase that gradually turned dark, White and Luoboat jumped up like rabbits. The 2 set the alarm and got up at the right time. They stayed in bed for another 10 minutes, and then hurried out of the dormitory. Of course they didn't eat. And of course, they didn't sleep well. The hundreds of millions of magic chess pieces before bed made them lose precious sleep. Running on an empty stomach and sprinting made them even more tired. It's over. The bell of despair hit their hearts. Bang! The two broke open the door and rushed into the classroom. 5 credits each, God Broheim. Professor Didi didn't even turn around to look at them. She just drew the moon on the blackboard. She was obviously going to talk about astronomy related to the moon in this class. White and Luo Boat sneaked into the classroom and sat down in the corner of the last row. As for the credits that were deducted, the two didn't care so much. Anyway, they couldn't get enough credits, right? Ha. Since it was the first astronomy class for first-year students, Professor Didi didn't talk about anything too profound. When she entered the second half of the class, she suddenly waved her hand, and the ceiling of the classroom became transparent in an instant. It seemed to become a water mirror, shortening the distance between it and the night sky. The students had never observed the moon so closely. Above the rippling dark night sky, a full moon hung in the sky, like a jade plate. Wow! The originally boring atmosphere disappeared. The classroom became lively in an instant. Professor Didi looked at the children pointing at the full moon with a gentle face. This time she didn't stop them. But 2 people looked at the full moon very close and couldn't suppress the surging emotions in their hearts. One was Dake. The other was White. Chapter 37. By the time the astronomy class ended, the night was already dark. Only a full moon hung high in the sky, its moonlight bright. Only then did the students realize that tonight was actually a full moon. Dake Dimming walked on a narrow path, far away from the crowd. He needed to find a secluded corner to calm down. The Shung Malian castle was well connected, and there were magic statues patrolling every night. He avoided the magic statues and found an open window nearby. He sat on the edge of the window and looked up to see the full moon in the night sky. Looking at the full moon from the top of the clock tower made his mood fluctuate uncontrollably, and his body became slightly hot. The reason for this was bliss. The bliss +1 slowly floated in his vision, making him realize that the moon was the symbol of bliss. Before this, he had never thought that the 7 sins could be so closely related to the stars. He remembered the URL. Mvipkanshu. 6. The great sin known as the source of evil. The star known as the beginning of all gods. Why were they related? What was the essence of the great sin? Thinking was a kind of exercise. Once it started, it was hard to stop. Dake's eyes turned, and he suddenly noticed a shadow flashing by on the bridge below. It seemed that someone was like him, unable to endure the loneliness of the night. White Gouda confirmed that he had reached a crossroads in his life. He had transferred his credits to Luoboat, and now he only had 30 credits left. Luoboat, who had obtained 100 credits, could finally go to Professor Ka Zaire to buy the materials for Fantasy Beast. He had heard that the materials for Fantasy Beast were quite expensive, and that the time that could be bought with 100 credits was only at the beginner stage. There was only 1 night left before the next magic class, and tonight was Luoboat's last chance. This was a critical moment, and White should have been by Luoboat's side, assisting him with his homework. But he took advantage of the time when Luoboat went to find Professor Ka Zaire to slip away. It was White's first night out alone. When there was no one around, the overly large castle would inevitably produce a sense of desolation and gloominess. White was quite brave, but she couldn't help but hug her arms and shiver. It wasn't until he came to an external bridge and focused his attention on the 2-finger-thick black book in his hand that the chill gradually eased. After confirming that the moonlight was able to shine directly on the ground. Under the moonlight, Victor opened the cover of the book. What he saw was a short sentence: frowny face walk into the abyss and stare into the abyss. When the moonlight shone on the characters, the originally flat characters suddenly trembled in White's vision, and transformed into a language that he had never seen before but could understand. Clear the fog and see the truth. The full moon will guide you. It was on the second day of school when he entered the library for the first time, when he obtained this book, Into the Abyss. In order to complete his summoning assignment, he had to search for information about the Minotaur. He found this Walk into the Abyss that was hidden in a corner. After confirming through Luoboat that only he could see the changes in the text. Should it be a pleasant surprise, or was it a sense of mission from the unseen world? White felt like he had been chosen. His last name was God, and his bloodline originated from the legendary hero. But in fact, other than being welcomed and celebrated by the students at the beginning, he didn't feel special as the hero's son. Until he found this book. Full moon. It was a word that was fascinating in and of itself. After more than a month of playing, he almost forgot about this book hidden in the drawer. Until tonight, in astronomy class, when he saw the full moon at a very close distance. Only then did Werther remember the book. He couldn't hold back the excitement in his heart and finally came here with the book. When the moonlight shone on the paper for about 15 seconds, the changed text changed again. The pink mist rose and converged into the shape of a bird, giving it guidance on its path. White was ecstatic and immediately followed Pai's guidance. Upstairs, Dake, who was sitting by the window, happened to see everything. Naturally, he also saw the pink arrow that only certain people could see, and his eyes gradually became strange. Should we follow them? Or should I just leave it be? If this was yesterday, Dake would definitely pretend that he didn't see it. But tonight he couldn't calm down. He took out the school card, injected a trace of magic power, and summoned the little fiend magic beast. Go follow. Roger. The little fiend magic beast immediately spread its wings and flew down. Dake also jumped down and quickly walked downstairs to the bridge. With the school card in hand, he could clearly see where the little fiend magic beast was flying. After crossing the bridge, he was in no hurry. Just like that, he maintained a fixed distance and followed White without being able to see him at all. It was already 9:30 in the evening, and there was not a single person in the castle except for the stupid golems. They followed him like this for about 10 minutes. White was still walking forward, but Dake suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He thought of something and hurriedly hid behind the statue of an unknown Grand Magus. Standing close to the statue, the Grand Magus' wide robe successfully covered his whole body. The slightly hurried footsteps hurriedly passed by. Only when the sound completely disappeared did Dake let out a light sigh and slowly walked out from behind the statue. At this time, the school card suddenly trembled. Not long after, the little fiend magic beast flew back. It lost him. He seemed to have noticed me, and then suddenly sped up, disappearing after turning a corner. The little fiend magic beast explained in a long-winded manner, its face full of grievance. Dake nodded in amusement. He didn't see you, right? It wasn't unexpected that the little fiend magic beast would lose him. After all, he was the hero's son, so there would always be something special about him that no one knew. Perhaps he had the legendary sixth sense or seventh sense? The question was, did he see what the little fiend magic beast looked like? The little fiend magic beast desperately shook its head. Definitely he didn't see me. It's good that he didn't see me. Dake began to walk back. There was originally no need to follow him. He didn't take this matter to heart. There were many uncertainties in the Shungmalian world. The history of the castle was too old, and the secrets were too old. Too many people had already forgotten the history. When the hidden secrets came to the surface, the dust of history would eventually fade. And the truth always came with the fog. Who would uncover the fog? Who could grasp the truth? The hero was here. Chapter 38. White Gouda carefully pushed open the mural and came out of the wall. Just now, he vaguely sensed that someone was following him, but when he turned the corner, he saw a pink torch pointing directly at the wall. The word magic condensed on the torch. He reached out with his left hand and poured magic into the wall. The wall rippled like water. He gritted his teeth and entered, entering an extremely secretive secret passage. On both sides of the passage, there were torches every few meters. When someone approached, the torches would burst into flames and illuminate the passage. The passage was winding and there were many forks. Sometimes it was like a snake, sometimes it was up and down. As his senses were gradually confused, White could no longer tell whether he was going down or going up. When he finally got out of the passage, he saw the same scenery in the castle. After a few more steps, he entered another secret passage. After repeating this several times, White was completely confused. Remember in 1 second. https://m. Vip can't you? VIP. As the fog on the page gradually dispersed, the words became blurred, and Into the Abyss returned to silence. White felt that he had been fooled. It took Victor half an hour to escape from the labyrinth of the castle and return to the common room of the Knights Academy. Luoboat was still rushing to make the fantasy beast. One of his peers happened to be interested and gave him a few pointers. Probably because he understood the difficulty and value of accumulating credits, Robert was very cautious. Every step he took was extremely slow, and the production process could be considered smooth. Now he had reached the most crucial step, which was also the most difficult step, the drawing of refining array number 1. White watched silently, not daring to disturb him. But when he was drawing the refining array that even Deanna could successfully draw, Luoboat was extremely nervous. His fingers trembled, and the tip of the pen slipped. He had made a mistake. Oh, don't be nervous, Luoboat, we can continue. White rushed over and held his hand. Luoboat was sweating profusely, but with the help of White, he managed to put away the pen and continued to draw lines. Even though the extra stroke was very eye-catching, he still managed to complete the entire refining formation number 1. The refinement array lit up smoothly. Luoboat was so nervous that his whole body was trembling. It took him several tries before he was able to successfully pick up the fantasy beast's hair and put it into the light. As the hair was gradually engulfed by the golden light of refining formation number 1, the light became even brighter. Golden threads separated from the number 1 refining formation and wrapped around the magic card in layers. Finally, a golden cocoon was formed. White said, "There's one more step. Luoboat, input your magic power and think about the things you like." Luoboat placed his hand on the golden cocoon and slowly injected magic power into it. Something I like? Magic chess? The magic card broke out of the cocoon. Luoboat excitedly picked up the magic card that the two brothers had worked on for 3 days. The blurry and transparent outline on the card began to change as soon as it met his eyes. It was neither Jack Russell, Ron's guardian angel in Harry Potter, nor was it Ron's pet, Spotty, a little mouse. It was the eternally motionless castle in the magic chess. Card name, Fantasy Beast. Type, Elf card. Level, Race Elemental. Attribute, Ground. Magic power 300, attack 0, defense 300, ultimate skill solid defense. When Luoboat summoned his fantasy beast, Castle, everyone was stunned. The castle of the magic chess was equivalent to the player's life. It occupied a fixed 3x3 chess space and had 10 times the health bar of a single chess piece. It could consume 1 turn to activate the inherent skill, solid defense, which reduced the damage to the castle in the next turn by half. Once the castle was captured, the player would be declared defeated. Luoboat's fantasy beast, Castle, was also a 3x3x3x3m huge cube. When it was summoned, it gave people a sense of immovable solidity. Wow. Luoboat, you're good. White punched Luoboat's shoulder in surprise. Luoboat was so excited that his neck turned red. He said excitedly, "Come here, my castle, let me have a good look at you." The castle didn't move at all. After several attempts, Luoboat's face turned pale. Someone suddenly said, "What's so surprising, Luoboat? The castle of the magic chess can't move. Isn't that common sense?" "Ha ha 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 ha. I'm sorry, I can't help it, ha 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 ha." That night, Luoboat dreamed that he had transformed into a majestic castle, but a group of rats with front teeth gnawed at the corners. He gradually lost hope and finally collapsed. White also had a dream. He dreamed of the librarian in the library. That senior from the senior year. He dreamed of taking a walk with her at the back of the open school. Everything seemed to have returned to normal on Thursday. White and Luoboat returned to their usual selves. Their enthusiasm for studying was gone, but they were a bit more disciplined than before. After class, they would avoid Aima. Aima didn't even think about paying attention to them. Dake earned credits as usual for his weekend shopping at Travelers Street. By the way, he got an extra 200 credits for being a substitute teacher. Dake always felt that his vertical calculation method bonus points were too little and argued for it. Professor Lily gave him another 150 credits. So it was really easy to earn credits. After the history of magic class in the afternoon, Dake went to the library as usual. People grow up. He was already able to walk past Panduola without changing his expression. But after he walked far away, he suddenly turned around and saw Werther talking to Chin Yushan shyly. This made him realize something, and he couldn't help but smile, as if nothing had happened. New homework was assigned for the arithmetic class. Every time this happened, Deanna and Luosi would pester him. Dake looked at the two little girls sitting across from him and felt a little helpless. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Deanna finally finished her homework and leaned back in her chair with a wow sound. The little white rabbit hidden in her thin school uniform was eager to jump out. After completing her homework, Deanna became restless. She quietly took out a card with a black rose drawn with ink and moved close to Dake. "Hey Dake, do you want to try this divination card? I heard it's very accurate." Dake looked up and said casually, "Love divination? So you know about it." Deanna was like a kitten who was caught stealing dried fish. She moved the love divination card back little by little. "It's not like I don't really know what's going on outside." Dark found it a little funny. He asked again, "Where did you get this card?" Deanna thought for a while. "One of them was a gift when I bought candy. This one was stuck in the crack of the door when I went out this morning." Dake frowned. "Someone is spreading this kind of card? Can you lend me this card?" Deanna immediately said happily, "Of course." Her finger was cut. Blood. Blood. Chapter 39. With the card in hand, Dake took a closer look at it. For this thing to be so popular, it naturally couldn't be a shoddy product. The card itself was similar to the material of the magic card, and the flowers depicted on it were vivid and lifelike, giving people the feeling that they would bloom at any time. Deanna's card was a cherry blossom design, and Dake's card was a black rose. In addition, Professor Lily's card was a blue rose. Dake also saw that Aima's card was a lily. Cherry blossoms symbolized love and hope, representing elegant, simple, and pure love. The black rose symbolized desperate love, full of hatred and curses, wanting to take the one you love as your own. The blue rose represented pure love, sincere and kind prayers, the arrival of miracles, and the occurrence of the impossible. As for the lily, it represented 100 years of love, containing the deep blessings for family and love. This kind of card used a variety of different colors, not only giving each card a different meaning, but also adding additional elements to collect. The first website was https://m. Vipcanchu. Vip. In addition to the exquisite appearance, the card's function was also very outstanding. By injecting magic, the flower could come to life, and even emit a burst of floral fragrance. In particular, you could see the divination of the one you love. And even the one you love, the one you love. This was really attractive to the Shungmalian students in their adolescence. Dake pondered for a moment, injected a trace of magic, and gently flicked the card. The black rose on the card suddenly flew out, and the petals scattered with the wind. He stretched out his hand to catch a black rose, but he only felt a faint chill. Then, the black rose dissipated as if it had dissolved. He was deep in thought, and suddenly he looked up. He didn't know when Deanna had leaned over, but they were eye to eye and nose to nose. A trace of milk fragrance went into his nose. Yes, this child secretly ate milk candy in the library. Dake, who had exposed Deanna's crime, immediately pressed her forehead and pushed her away. Deanna stepped back unhappily, but her eyes were still fixed on the love divination card in Dake's hand. Dake did not mind. He also wanted to find out who his true love was. But on the surface of the card was a picture of Ivan. O equals omega smiley face Emma? Deanna widened her eyes in surprise. Dake, on the other hand, shook his head and smiled. Looks like this love divination card isn't that reliable. However, when he was injecting his magic power, he noticed something strange. Can you give it to me? Dake looked up and asked. Deanna quickly nodded. Dake, you really like your fantasy beast. Dake nodded. After all, this is my first magic elven card. But from the looks of it, the so-called divination of this flower tablet is not a real lover. It probably used some small tricks. Is that so? Deanna tilted her head and became happy again. On the other side of the reading room, White was doing his homework while biting the end of his pen, frowning. Luoboat was even more unbearable than him. The consequences of not paying attention in class were gradually fermenting. As the difficulty of his homework increased day by day, there was finally a problem that he could not solve no matter how hard he thought. His head hurt. White put down his pen and pulled out a flower tablet from the gap of his textbook. This flower tablet was a gift for the two of them when they bought the magic chess. The flower tablet was decorated with red lilacs. It was the feeling of first love. Quietly injecting his magic power, a fair and beautiful face appeared on the surface of the card. A teenager's love life was ignorant. At the very beginning, he cared about it because it was similar to his mother's profile. Later, it gradually developed into longing. He broke away from the mold and became independent. He cared about it just because it was her. Especially when he saw her again today, he became even more restless. Luoboat glanced over and muttered, "Do something if you like it so much." White blushed and was about to say that he would be satisfied as long as he could look at it a few more times. But the beautiful face on the card suddenly stuck out her tender tongue and licked the corner of her mouth. Ah! Werther let out a cry of surprise. In a library that needed to be quiet, his scream immediately attracted a lot of attention. Luoboat asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "No, it's nothing." Werther blushed and sat down, his hands clenching the flower cards. "Let's end the homework here. Let's go practice dueling. Tomorrow is our last hope." Luoboat had been waiting for this moment. He quickly closed his books and homework and stuffed them into his backpack. The two of them quickly left the library. When they registered their departure time at the counter, White's heart almost jumped out of his chest. That night, Dake ended his time in the library early. He was quite concerned about the trace of abnormality when he injected his magic power into the flower tablet. But it was not easy to experiment in the library. He could only go back to his dorm. When he walked out of the library, the sky was already dark. He looked up at the night sky and found that the moon was still very round. When he reached his dorm, he locked the door, put down his backpack, and took out the black rose flower tablet again. Something's wrong. Putting the flower tablet on the table, Dake frowned and thought for a long time. Then he took out a magic pen from his drawer. Using a magic pen as a medium to transmit magic power could be relatively effective in avoiding some dangers and making it easier to observe. Dake took a step back, extended his hand, touched the magic pen to the flower tablet, and then injected magic power. It was not the tiny bit he had done in the library, but a continuous stream. Soon, the black rose on the card retreated to the edge under the influence of magic power, and the words "love of your heart" appeared on the card. This time, the one who appeared was still Ivan. But Dake only had to think, and that Ivan disappeared. The one who appeared on the card was the Valkyrie Yvette, who was far away in the Duke's territory. Yvette was unexpectedly a golden-haired beauty with a gentle appearance. If it were not for the statues all over the kingdom, the people would probably think that she was the apple of some noble family's eye. Dake had another thought, and Yvette's figure gradually disappeared. This time, Deanna appeared on the card. Then Luosi, Panduola. Professor Lili faces flashed on the card, and more magic power was injected into the flower tablet. Suddenly, the black rose on the card was peeled, and starting from the stamen, it disintegrated into slender black lines. Those black lines turned into thorny vines, entangling like small snakes. Dark abruptly raised the magic pen, and the thorny black vines suddenly broke through the flat surface. Snakeheads grew out from the tips, and swarmed out to bite Dark. Small darts. 3 shark-headed syringes suddenly flew out, and in an instant, they exploded through the snake heads, nailing the restless flower tablet to the table. Nirvana -1. Sigma. Sigma asterisk take my recommendation. Chapter 40. The Blissful. One floating in his vision made Dake realize that his feeling was not wrong. This flower card could indeed absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. The so-called divination was just the person you are thinking of, extracted from the surface of your thoughts. By giving the flower card the concept of love divination, it led people to naturally think of the person they were thinking of when they used it, and then that person would be shown on the card. Even the following phrase, the person you love, was only what you thought of it. It was just a small trick like that. Because it was not harmful, it would not arouse people's vigilance. On the surface, it was just a very interesting little toy. But now it seemed that it was not as simple as it looked. Dake used the magic pen to test again, and confirmed that the flower card of the black rose was indeed damaged. He took out his notebook and began to record. He remembered the website, Vipcanchu. 6.1. The flower card could absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. 2. There must be people who accidentally injected too much magic, but so far there was no feedback, indicating that the flower card only had a special reaction to the magic of a few people. I am the only one here for now. 3. The flower card could absorb great sins, indicating that its origin sequence was extremely high. For the person who could make this flower card must have a high level of skill. 5. Want. No matter who made this flower card for whatever purpose. In fact, its ability to absorb blissful would not change. If he could collect enough flower cards, he could boldly try to raise blissful to more than 100 to make the blissful series of magic cards. His heart became restless. His greed was a little out of control. Dake calmed his mind, cleaned up the remains of the flower card, and put it in a sealed bag. At the same time, White and Luoboat were practicing in the corridor of the castle. White's magic beast was a stag with the light attribute. When it raised its head, it was a full 2 meters tall with majestic antlers that were forked like branches. It had a much higher attack power than ordinary magic beasts. However, as an illusory beast, its magic power was still only 100. Card name, Magic Beast. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race Bird Beast. Attribute, Light magic power, 100 attack, 200 defense, 100 ultimate skill. Light of the soul. Dake's illusory beast, Eevee, had undergone a qualitative change in its core. White's magical beast, Stag, and Luoboat's magical beast, Castle, were completely reflected on the surface. Their illusory beasts were different from the standard template. White wasn't blindly arrogant when he tried to win the class competition. But after practicing with Luoboat for a while, White gradually realized that he was too naive. Luoboat's castle was too hard. Even with the stag's 200 points of attack, he was unable to deal any damage to it. After repeated attempts to no avail, White said helplessly, "This is not fair, Luoboat." Luoboat, on the other hand, swept away the gloom from last night and laughed in high spirits. "No, this is reality, White. 300 greater than 200. Even I can calculate it." White frowned. "But I remember Professor Cheong-si once said that the surface data of a magic sprite card can only be used as a reference. In reality, there will be a lot of discrepancies." Luoboat said proudly, "The discrepancies are that I'm harder than you think." "Ha ha. I can't play anymore." White lamented. "Let's call it a night. I want to practice by myself." Then the two parted ways. Luoboat strolled around outside and saw many first-year students practicing duels. But they were all small fights, so he smiled reservedly. After parting ways with Luoboat, White took out the card decorated with red lilacs. He injected magic power, and that person's face appeared on the card again. White's expression was a bit absent-minded. The changes in the library made him realize that this card was unusual. But he didn't know how to deal with it. Should he tell the professor? Or should he explore it himself? If he told the professor, would his secret be exposed? He didn't come up with a solution. White took out into the abyss that he always carried with him. The moon was still very round tonight. Would it work? But as soon as he opened the book, And even before he walked out of the castle to bathe in the moonlight, the line of words began to twist, and a pink mist rose from the pages. But it didn't converge into the shape of a roue. Instead, it floated towards the lilac card in his hand. Startled, White subconsciously separated the two cards. However, the pink mist sped up and instantly drilled into the flower tile. Then the card immediately changed and the lilacs on the card bloomed, releasing a strong floral fragrance. The figure of Panduola suddenly came to life. The senior who drilled half her body out of the card raised her soft and slender hands and combed her hair back, revealing her snow-white and delicate neck. White opened his eyes wide and looked at the Panduola, who was exactly the same as the real person. He was completely stunned. A few minutes later, White put into the abyss back into his bag, and only the card with the pink mist was left in his hand. He held the card in his palm, and from time to time lowered his head to look at the Panduola in the card and whispered, "Is it this way?" Panduola chuckled and nodded slightly. Her laughter was gentle and soft, like a clear spring flowing into his heart. White followed its guidance with a bit of infatuation. Soon he arrived at the place where he had walked last night. He hurriedly walked past the statue of the Grand Magus, and then turned into another fork in the road. Panduola's guidance was even clearer than the mist. He entered the secret passage and quickened his pace. This time, he didn't take a fork in the road, and after 10 minutes he arrived at a hall. This hall was hidden in the depths of the castle, and was about the size of a lecture hall. There were 2 stone pillars in the center, and the pillars were carved with images of dancing goddesses. At the very front, there was a tall altar. On top of the altar stood a statue of a goddess. As White walked in, the torches on both sides of the hall lit up automatically, illuminating every corner of the hall. White looked nervously at the statue. The statue was carved out of fine white jade, and the dust of history didn't leave many traces on it. It clasped its hands in front of its chest, closed its eyes, and nodded slightly, as if it was praying. The light of the fire shone on its body, but the reflection was as white as the bright moon. White suddenly realized that just looking at it made him feel like his mind was being sucked away. It was so sacred and beautiful. Footsteps suddenly sounded. Chapter 41. Who is it? White was very sharp. He almost instinctively went around the altar and hid behind the goddess statue. Then the footsteps became more frequent. There was more than one person here. White suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loss. So I'm not the only one here? That feeling was like a toy that had been licked by others after much difficulty. Moreover, it was licked by several people at the same time. He didn't dare to act rashly. He could only listen to the sounds and imagine what they were doing. There were at least 5 or 6 people in the temple. Their voices were very low, and he couldn't hear what they were saying. But in the end, they seemed to place something in front of the goddess statue and chanted an incantation that sounded like a chant. The atmosphere gradually became tense. Thankfully, Victor's willpower was strong enough. If it had been Robert, he would have screamed and screamed in fright. Remember this in 1 second. https://mvipcanshu. VIP. As the incantation reached a certain stage, the white light on the goddess statue seemed to flow, and the light became brighter and brighter. White tried to look up, and found that some of the minor flaws on the statue were being carefully repaired. Are they just a group of tinkerers here to repair the goddess statue? This thought flashed through White's mind. He couldn't believe it himself. When the incantation ended, the atmosphere eased a little, and the group of tinkerers also spoke more freely. White could faintly hear what they were saying. Burn them to death. For the goddess. We will succeed. This is the holy war. Sizzle. The bright moon disappeared, and the day was coming. The light of dawn shone on the earth, as if the path of righteousness was eternal. Dake opened the door and walked out of the bedroom. Something slid down the door and attracted his attention. He looked down and couldn't help but smile. But after last night's experience, he quickly pursed his lips and repeatedly chanted Chu Shi Biao a few times before bending down to pick up the flower tile on the ground. The pure white devil's snare is a soft flower of love. Those who see this flower will be cleansed of evil. Dake inserted a bit of magic into the flower tile. Little Ibu appeared on the tile and gave him the best morning greeting. Today was still a refreshing day. Before classes on magical beasts started, there was only one duel class on Friday. Even so, the duel class was held on Friday morning, so that the duel class could be delayed as much as they wanted. Today's class was held by all 4 schools. The class was held at Battle Hall 2. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, and almost all of the first-year students were eager to try. They were looking forward to the first duel in their lives. Even if the so-called elite mode was just a watered-down version of the real duel, no one would care about this. As long as they could go on stage, as long as they could shout "my turn," the first-year students would be happy for a long time. Of course, there were also unhappy people. After all, not everyone could complete the illusory beast within a week. In yesterday's class, many people had their marks deducted because they couldn't make a magical beast. If it wasn't for White's generous help, Luoboat would have been one of them. Since it wasn't time for class yet, Dake found a bench to rest on. Not long after, Deanna squeezed in with Luosi. "Dake, who do you think will win today's duel?" Deanna asked cheerfully. Dake smiled. "It's just a competition in class." Diana stretched out her hand and slapped her thigh, causing her whole body to bounce. "Anyway, my big white bear is already thirsty." Luosi quickly pulled Deanna's sleeve and whispered, "Control yourself. Didn't you say last night that you wanted to act more like a girl?" Deanna. Comma. Ding ding ding. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. The students stopped chatting and consciously lined up in the middle of the stadium. Professor Cheongsi was half a minute late. He walked into the stadium with a bunch of stuff. "The weather is good today. Let's run a lap to warm up." Professor Cheongsi was as valiant as ever. He didn't hold back when he gave out tasks. The students, who were full of anticipation, were all stunned. "I thought we didn't have to run today." Although the students complained, they were forced to run under the pressure of the professor. Luoboat knew that extra points wouldn't help, so he didn't use any more strength. He controlled his speed and ran side by side with White. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "Oh yeah, White, where did you go last night? I wanted to play around with you at 9 o'clock. White opened her mouth and said after a while, "Luoboat, I don't have as much stamina as you. Can we talk after we finish running?" Luoboat, "Okay." After 2 laps, apart from a few students, the first-year students of the 4 schools were all listless. Luoboat wanted to continue asking, but Professor Cheongsi said loudly, "Those who still have energy over there, come and help." Luoboat had no choice but to walk over with a few of the stronger students to help Professor Cheongsi set up the venue. It took about 10 minutes for the venue to be set up. The students had regained their energy and gathered in the center of the stadium. After a while, Professor Cheongsi took out a metal ball that looked like a bowling ball with 3 holes. He walked over with one hand holding it. He looked at the students of the 4 schools and asked casually, "Does anyone know what I'm holding in my hand?" The junior magisters looked at each other. More than half of them immediately raised their hands. This time, even White and Luoboat raised their hands. Professor Cheongsi randomly picked a student. That student said excitedly, "It's a magic conducting ball, Professor." Professor Cheongsi said with satisfaction, "That's right, it's a magic conducting ball. It's the core of a magic conducting duel." She then inserted her thumb, index finger, and middle finger into the 3 holes of the magic conducting ball and continued. The so-called magic conducting ball is also called a dual ball or a life ball. As long as magic power is poured into it like this, it can create a 360 degrees life boundary without any blind spots. Swati, tell us about the different levels of life boundaries. Yes, Professor. Saraswati immediately stepped forward. Her wheat-colored skin was still outstanding today. The life boundaries of a magic conducting ball are generally divided into 5 levels. The strength of each level is different. A level 1 life boundary has 1,000 points of magic power. A level 2 life boundary has 2,000 points of magic power. A level 3 life boundary has 4,000 points of magic power. A level 4 life boundary has 8,000 points of magic power. and a level 5 life boundary has 16,000 points of magic power. In a magic conducting duel, only when the opponent's life boundary is completely destroyed, or when the opponent voluntarily surrenders and uses up all of their magic conducting cards, can they be considered victorious. 5 points Swati. Professor Cheong-si poured magic power into the magic conducting ball. A spherical barrier made of many hexahedrons spread out. She gently pushed forward, and the all-metal magic conducting ball slowly floated forward. The magic conducting ball circled above the students' heads, and then returned to Professor Cheong-si's hand. She said, "In a formal duel, controlling the magic conducting ball to avoid the opponent's attack is a must-learn skill. Of course, we don't have that many requirements for today's duel, and we're only using the retired practice magic conducting ball. The life boundary's magic power is temporarily set at 500 points. Omega." Chapter 42. After that, he talked about some rules that they had to pay attention to during the duel. Professor Cheong-si took out a jar full of number plates and asked the students to pick them one by one. The little mages stepped out one after another and reached into the jar to pick the number plates. Surprisingly, out of the 4 classes, there were only 78 students who managed to complete the production of the fantasy beast within a week. On average, there were less than 20 students in each class. Most of the remaining students were still in the process of failing and had to start saving credits to buy material packs. It felt like the professors had set up a trap and opened up Traveler's Street before teaching the students how to make the Phantom Beast. This was to teach the first-year students who didn't know how to control themselves and how to spend credits. Anyway, it wasn't clear if the others had learned their lesson, but White and Luo Boat had learned their lesson. As for whether they would change after learning their lesson, that was another matter. Dake walked to the jar and picked up a number plate. The website was https://mvipcan'tshu. VIP. Good lord, I'm destined to be? Deanna leaned over. Hey, what's your number? Dake. Number 7 and you? Deanna. 77 hehe. Luo C. 55. Inject your magic power into the number plate and take it apart. Give me the blue side. Professor Cheong-si took out an empty jar again and took back the blue number plate. Dake finally noticed that the number plate in his hand was red and blue. After injecting some magic power into it, the red and blue cards would lose their magnetic force and could be taken apart easily. After handing in the blue number plate according to Professor Cheong-si's instructions, Dake held the red number plate and waited quietly. The center of the arena was divided into 4 equal sections by props. Professor Cheong-si placed 2 magic balls in each section. The students who didn't have the Phantom Beast were responsible for injecting magic power into the magic balls and learning how to open the life enchantment. Professor Cheong-si chose another 4 people to be the judges. The competition uses a single elimination system. The winner advances, and the loser exits. There is only one champion in the world of magic duels. Professor Cheong-si casually grabbed 2 blue number plates from the jar and placed them on one side. Then he grabbed another 2 blue number plates and placed them on the other side. He repeated this process 4 times until there were 4 sets of number plates. She flipped open the number plate and read, "In the first round, 78 will advance to 39. For groups will proceed simultaneously. Number 6 and number 8. Number 3 and number 28, number 66 and number 7, number 49 and number 5 get ready. Opening celebration?" Dake glanced at the red number 7 in his hand and didn't seem to care. However, Deanna and Luo C seemed to be more nervous than him. "Dake, do your best. I'll always be on your side. Good luck." It wasn't like they were going to participate in variety shows. Dake walked to court 3 with a dark face. A total of 8 people went down the stage at the same time. Some were nervous and some were calm. Dake glanced at contestant 66. She was a girl from the School of Magic. She had 2 ponytails, big eyes, and a pale face. He comforted her casually. "Don't be nervous. It's just a drill." Okay. The girl clenched her teeth and clenched her fingers. The two of them went to the contestants' seats on both sides of the stage. In the official competition, there was a platform for the contestants to look down from above. However, here, there were only simple contestants' seats drawn with white lines. Dake stood in the contestant's seat and looked at the stage. The rules of the competition, in class this time, were simple replicas of the rules of the real competition. 1/6 of the stage near the contestants' seats was divided into the summoning area. This meant that the summoning area was limited. You couldn't summon a magic fairy directly to the opponent's face. It was said that there was no such rule in the first magician duels. Therefore, the magicians often used tactical summoning to make the competition violent and chaotic. Some magicians even used line-of-sight interference to summon a large magic fairy directly to the opponent's face to block the opponent's vision. Later, the rules were gradually perfected, and this kind of farce decreased a lot. However, there was no limit to human imagination. There were still countless tricks under the rules. The referee for Court 3 was Rentgen from the House of Nobles. "Hi." Rentgen waved at Dake, looking very dispirited. There was no other way. Being a referee was equivalent to a public execution. It was their fault for not being able to create a fantasy beast in a week. Of course, Dake remembered this classmate, who went shopping early on Saturday morning. It seemed that he had spent all his credits in Traveler's Street. In the end, he didn't have enough credits to buy more materials for experiments. And his fellow sufferer Civet seemed to be next door. Dake smiled subtly. In the official duel, the deck of cards was placed on the card table in the contestant's seat. The projection mechanism would enlarge the cards for the audience to see. At the same time, there were rules such as shuffling cards on the spot, starting with 5 cards, 1 round in 30 seconds, 2 cards in 1 round, and so on. The duel was divided into 3 stages. 1. Preparation stage, shuffling cards, communication, taunting, starting 2. Battle stage, drawing cards, summoning, fighting, beating 3. End stage, communication, taunting, receiving cards, declaration. Of course, there weren't that many rules for today's duel. The twin-tailed girl from the Mage Academy was already holding the only fantasy beast card in her hand. She looked nervous as she waited for the referee's whistle. Dake was suddenly worried that she would break the fantasy beast. Both sides' magic balls had already been activated with 500 mana points. They were now floating in front of each other. Using mana to control the magic balls was an advanced technique. It wasn't within the scope of the first year's lessons. Therefore, if they wanted to move the magic balls, they could only move them physically. Rentgen, beat, begin preparation. Dake took out Fantasy Beast, Ibu from his card pack and held it between his index and middle fingers. He entered the preparation stage. Rentgen. Countdown to battle, 30 seconds. Rentgen. 3, 2, 1, begin. The moment the battle began. My turn. Summoning. Dake raised his magic card in an instant. In the 8th second of the battle, he successfully summoned his fantasy beast. Ibu lightly landed on the ground without any hesitation. It began to run like the wind. In the 12th second of the battle, it had already run across the battlefield, which was only 10 meters away. It used its paws to press down on the magic balls floating on the ground. Omega. Ibu tilted its head and looked at the girl opposite it. It had a cute expression on its face. Then it slapped the magic balls 4 times in a row. The magic balls' life barrier were completely wiped out. The twin-tailed girl was bleeding from the cuteness. Her mana was cut off, and she hurriedly summoned a second time. Ibuzachan gently waited for her to summon her fantasy beast, and then gave the magic-conducting ball the final blow. Battle over. Winner, Dake Demong. Dake sighed, put away the cards and turned around. Boring. Boring. TSK, ________ that you're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.